Lumian listened intently to the woman before him, each word she uttered resonating deeply with his growing understanding of the world. The more he learned, the more he agreed with her conclusions. Though now a beyonder, with improved combat abilities and an uncanny knack for exploiting his environment, Lumian remained uncertain about what awaited him at higher sequences. Among the beyonder creatures he had encountered, the shotgun-wielding monster was leagues above the vortex-shaped proboscis creature in both threat and intelligence. The contractee monster, while formidable, had glaring weaknesses. It lacked advanced tracking capabilities, long-range attacks, and its invisibility was easily countered by a hunter's mastery of subtle traces in the environment. Like many monsters, its low intelligence proved its downfall, as it blundered into Lumian's traps. Despite the contractee's shortcomings, Lumian hadn't expected it to be classified as equivalent to a Sequence 7. The realization starkly contrasted with his perception of the shotgun monster, whose sheer power and cunning made it an entirely different challenge. Abilities, intelligence, preparation, improvisation, environmental factors. Too many variables determine the outcome of a battle, ****, Lumian mused. Then, without much hope, he asked, "Can I pray directly for contractee powers?" The woman chuckled softly. "That's a fast track to your own demise." Her explanation was simple yet chilling. "In theory you could. The power sealed within you isn't limited to a Sequence 7 equivalent. But can your body endure such a tremendous boon? Or rather, corruption? Unless you're ready to become a monster or a puppet of that existence, I wouldn't recommend it. Otherwise, it won't be long before you sacrifice your own sister." A cold shiver ran down Lumian's spine. The thought alone was enough to quell his ambitions of advancing too quickly. "So the most significant boon I can handle right now is as a dancer?" he asked cautiously. The woman nodded. "Precisely. That's why I waited for you to become a beyonder and digest some of it before telling you this. Your body, mind, and spirit need to strengthen significantly before you can resist the corruption of higher boons. With time, you'll adapt and be ready for the next sequence." Her words clarified his priorities. To achieve his goals, he needed to focus on mastering the art of the dancer, which would greatly enhance his ability to navigate the dream ruins and confront the unknown. "How should I pray?" Lumian asked, eager to learn the next step. The woman's tone shifted to one of solemnity. "What I'm about to share is for your ears alone. Speak of it to no one, or you'll bring ruin upon them." Lumian nodded but hesitated. "Will hearing it cause any harm to me?" She smirked and replied cryptically, "When did you get the idea that nothing was already wrong with you?" Her words struck a nerve, and Lumian instinctively glanced down at his chest. "The mark left by that great existence balances the corruption within you," she continued. "When you perform the ritual, you'll confront that power directly. Consider it a controlled step into corruption, but one necessary to advance." Despite her reassurances, Lumian couldn't shake his unease. The woman then described the ritual in meticulous detail. The first part involves invoking the power of inevitability. It corresponds to the thorn symbol on your chest. Speak it in ancient languages such as Hermes, Jotun, or Dragonese. Avoid Hermes for the eye. It must not break the sanctity of the rite. As she spoke, the room seemed to darken imperceptibly. The second part, she added with precision, is, "You are the past, the present, and the future. You are the cause, the effect, and the process." The atmosphere grew heavier, and Lumian felt a vortex of dark energy swirling around him. The table groaned as though alive, and an ebony worm emerged from the wood. Before Lumian could react, the woman slammed her glass onto the creature, crushing it. She nonchalantly wiped the mess with a napkin and returned to her drink, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Remember," she said, her tone firm, "the third part is simpler. I implore you. I beseech your benediction. I plead for the power of dancer." She instructed Lumian to memorize the phrases and scramble them to minimize any potential risk before the ritual. The rest of the ritual followed the structure of common magical practices. She outlined the materials needed: gray amber, tulips, cloves, and deer musk, 2 of which would be used for candles and the others as oils or herbs. "What about the item representing the deity?" Lumian asked. "The thorn symbol is on my chest. I can't exactly carve it out. The woman smirked. When crafting the candle, infuse it with a few milliliters of blood from your chest. That will serve as the connection. The candle will become a symbol, activating the sealed power within you. Lumian committed the instructions to memory. He resolved to gather the materials and consult his sister, Aurora, about the necessary preparations. As the woman prepared to leave, he asked one final question. What was that lizard-like creature that crawled out of the deputy padre's mouth? She smiled enigmatically. I can't explain that to you. Lumian sighed, his curiosity left unsatisfied. Leaving the tavern, Lumian searched the village for the trio of foreigners. Soon, the familiar sound of tinkling bells caught his attention. Leah, with bells adorning her veil and boots, walked beside Ryan and Valentine. Suppressing his excitement, Lumian approached them, his voice low. I know who you're looking for. The trio exchanged astonished glances but followed Lumian, careful to maintain an air of nonchalance. Lumian stopped at the edge of the forest, a short distance from his home. The secluded spot, with its sparse trees and clear lines of sight, offered the perfect vantage to ensure no villagers were nearby. He turned back toward Leah and her companions, their soft bell tinkling growing louder as they approached. Leah smiled faintly as she asked, How do you know we're looking for someone? Lumian didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out the item he had carefully brought, a lever blue from his house. Holding it up, he flipped to the pages where several words had been meticulously cut out. Ryan's eyes narrowed as he nodded knowingly. So you wrote the letter asking for help. The trio exchanged glances. No one had mentioned a letter in Cordu, let alone one pieced together from words cut out of a lever blue. The only plausible explanation was that the boy before them was the letter's author. Leah instinctively glanced around, her sharp gaze scanning the forest. Oddly, the small silver bells hanging from her veil remained silent. Ryan's puzzled voice broke the silence. How can you be certain we're here because of the letter? Lumian smiled slyly. You told me yourselves. He let the silence linger before continuing. Foreigners rarely come to Cordu. Even fewer wander around chatting instead of trading wool, cheese, or lambs. Besides, all I did was show you this lever blue. Leah chuckled, realization dawning. So it was a test. Exactly. Ryan nodded approvingly. Anyone unfamiliar with the letter would have thought it was just a prank, typical of Corda's prankster king. Lumian grinned mischievously. You actually believed it? Come on, I was joking. I'll tell you the real reason later. Leah gritted her teeth. You're insufferable. Aren't you afraid we won't believe you when you do tell us? That's your choice, Lumian said nonchalantly. Or you can verify it yourselves. Before Leah could retort, Valentine interjected impatiently. Your letter mentioned people acting strangely. What's so weird about them? Lumian's grin faded as he cracked his knuckles. Plenty. For starters, the Padre worships an evil god. Shepherd Pierre Barry turns people into sheep. Madame Pualis rides a demon-drawn carriage, and a translucent lizard crawls out of the Deputy Padre's mouth while he sleeps. Naroka, who's supposed to be dead, insists on going to Permitha. Louis Lund, the administrator's butler, just gave birth to a baby. Oh, and the legendary Warlock's owl occasionally visits the village. As he listed the absurdities, Ryan, Leah, and Valentine grew increasingly alarmed. The seasoned investigators had encountered their share of bizarre beyonder incidents, but never this many in one place. Leah finally broke the silence. You're not joking, are you? Lumian smiled faintly. I'm not done yet. Here's the biggest oddity. This isn't the first time we've had this conversation. Ryan, Leah, Valentine, my cabbages. The trio stiffened, caught off guard by his casual familiarity. Valentine frowned. What do you mean? I mean we're stuck in a time loop, Lumian replied bluntly. We've been repeating the same few days over and over. He quickly recounted their previous interactions, detailing incidents they couldn't possibly have shared in this timeline. As the trio listened, their faces shifted from skepticism to dawning realization. Valentine, deep in thought, suddenly blurted, Wait, I remember celebrating my son's birthday before leaving for Cordu. His birthday is April 10th. He froze, the weight of his revelation sinking in. But it was supposed to be March 29th when we arrived here. Lumian nodded. Exactly. You've been looping with the rest of us. Ryan's expression darkened as he muttered, "This isn't normal. We need to confirm the date with the outside world." "Good idea," Lumion agreed. "But tread carefully. If this is a time loop tied to a greater corruption, the usual protocol is to eradicate the area entirely. Asking for help might be suicide." Valentine bristled. "We're required to report anomalies. I'm willing to sacrifice myself if it means stopping this." Lumion blinked in disbelief. "Seriously? People like you exist? We're all going to die if you do that." Leah and Ryan stepped in, their calmer demeanor prevailing. Ryan patted Valentine's shoulder. "Let's gather more information before deciding. There might still be a way out." Leah added, "We'll wire for the date and some guidance. Nothing more for now." Relieved, Lumion outlined his plan. "First, confirm the date, and discreetly ask about the lizard creature. Second, while my sister distracts Madame Pualis with afternoon tea, we'll search the administrator's mansion. After that, we'll reassess." The trio exchanged glances, agreeing that the approach was reasonable. As they reached the village square, Ryan went to send the telegram while Leah, Valentine, and Lumion waited under the old elm tree. Leah turned to Lumion, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "So you're a Beyonder? And your sister too?" "Yes," Lumion admitted without hesitation. Leah smirked. "Aren't you worried we might arrest you?" "We're in the same sinking boat," Lumion replied with a shrug. "Let's survive the loop first. We can argue about arrests later." Leah nodded, though her gaze lingered on him thoughtfully. After a moment she asked, "Why can you remember previous loops?" Lumion's expression turned playful. "Not telling." When Leah narrowed her eyes, he relented with a laugh. "Honestly, I don't know. I've only retained memories from the last 2 cycles. Maybe I'll figure it out eventually." Leah was about to speculate further when Ryan emerged from the administration building, a grim look on his face. "We've got our answer."
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Leah and Valentine asked Ryan in unison, "How is it?" Although they had already believed Lumion's words, it was inevitable for people to hope for luck. They still held on to the hope that perhaps the problem wasn't that serious, because the kid wasn't knowledgeable enough to exaggerate. Ryan looked around and saw that there was no one else around the elm tree. He spoke in a low voice. "I was afraid to ask too directly. I only know that the real date is already late April. I don't know the exact date." Leah and Valentine fell silent. They had indeed fallen into a strange time loop. Judging from the various files and information, this was definitely not something the 3 of them should face or deal with. They were seasoned Beyonders who had handled many Beyonder incidents. It was the first time they had encountered such a serious and abnormal situation. Leah couldn't help but turn to look at Lumion. What kind of place is Cordu? There were abnormalities everywhere, each more exaggerated than the last. "I don't know either." Lumion had an innocent expression. Before the loop, this place was beautiful, and the people were simple. Everyone was normal and hospitable. He didn't tell the 3 foreigners that the person standing before them was also one of the abnormalities. Ryan sighed and said, "I've never encountered so many abnormalities at once, and every one of them is serious." "This is the most dangerous situation I've ever faced," echoed Valentine. Lumion was already a little numb to this. He sneered and said, "It's normal that you haven't encountered it before, because those who have encountered one are dead." Leah looked at him with a smile. "Don't say anything if you can't say something nice. People like you won't survive past childhood elsewhere." "Killed in the cradle?" Lumion mocked himself and asked Ryan, "Did you get an answer about the deputy padre?" Ryan nodded. "In the past few years, similar legends have emerged in various places across the northern and southern continents. Legend has it that heaven banished a group of sinful elves to the ground. They can only reside within human bodies, hoping to redeem their sins and gain absolution before returning to heaven. In some versions of the legend, these elves appear as translucent lizards. However, the elf I'm referring to is not the ancient elf race. It is more akin to a mixture of fairies and various spirits." Again in recent years, Lumion recalled that the legend of Madam Night had only surfaced recently. What was wrong with this world? He pondered for a moment before asking, Did they specify which deity's heaven it is? Ryan shook his head. What's remarkable is that every person who claims to have seen an elf believes it is from the kingdom of their local deity. The local deity referred to the orthodox gods of the local faith. Heavens of different deities? Lumion gazed up at the azure sky. Did that lizard-like elf come from the sky? However, according to Aurora, beyond the sky lay the cosmos. Each star represented a world. So were these extraterrestrial beings? Or were they from an astral plane beyond mysticism? As Lumion's thoughts raced, he asked curiously, in some versions of the legend, these elves appear as translucent lizards. What about the other details? Ryan shook his head once more. That's all they could uncover in a short period. They may need to communicate with headquarters for more information. Leah pondered and spoke. I am familiar with the legend of elves. I once met a native of Lemberg who shared that farmers in many regions of the south-central zone have reported mischievous fairies in recent years. These creatures, known as Alpies, would vandalize their homes and fields, or play pranks on them. The south-central zone referred to the area where Lemberg, Mason, Seeger, and other small countries were located. It also included a few areas in the Intis Republic, the Lone Kingdom, and the Fainapotter Kingdom. Most of them were located in the highlands, mountains, forests, areas filled with ruins and legends. Lumion listened attentively and concluded, this is not an isolated phenomenon. Each elf seems to have their unique way of causing trouble. With so many abnormalities in Cordu, and the lizards that inhabit human bodies shouldn't be an isolated phenomenon. Perhaps someone wants to use it to control the deputy padre. Very clear line of thinking. Lumion looked at the villagers who were returning home after finishing their work, and said to Leah and the others, meet me behind the hill where the administrator's castle is at 3:30 p.m. Will you join me to search for clues? Of course, Ryan agreed. Leah, however, called out to Lumion before he left. Is that all? You should brief us on the situation in the castle, its inhabitants, and Madame Puali's abnormality. We cannot explore and search without preparation. Lumion did not want to recall Madame Puali's matters, but he had to admit that Leah's request made sense. He had to endure the discomfort and tell them the entire story. Ryan and the others were mentally prepared, but they still looked a little dull upon hearing the tale. Leah lightened the mood with her tinkling laughter. It does not matter to me. I might experience such a thing in the future. This is an opportunity that most men never encounter. You must cherish it. However, Valentine ignored her joke and whispered with a cold expression, all of this needs to be purified. Lumion did not want to provoke Valentine, and waved his hand. See you in the afternoon. After taking a few steps, Lumion turned around to look at Ryan warily and asked, did Bertrand have any knowledge of the contents of your telegram? Bertrand was responsible for the telegraph, and if he knew about the date and the legend of the elves, it meant that the administrator knew as well. And if the administrator knew, Madame Puali's would know too. Don't worry, Ryan said reassuringly. We have a secret code. You won't be able to decipher it. Lumion breathed a sigh of relief only then, and left the village square, heading back to his building. As he walked a distance away, he spotted Ava Lizier herding a flock of white geese back home. Hey there, isn't this our spring elf? Lumion tried to push the bloody and cruel scenes from the Lent celebration out of his mind, and greeted Ava with his usual quip. Ava seemed a little embarrassed. I haven't been chosen yet. Her exquisite facial features made her grayish-white dress look less rustic. That won't be a problem, Lumion said with a smile. Raymond and I will help you campaign for votes. Ava looked surprised. You don't know. What don't I know? Lumion's heart skipped a beat. Had something happened in the village that wasn't a part of the historical process? Ava observed his expression and suspected that he was teasing her. After a few seconds, the girl frowned in concern and said, Raymond's missing. You didn't know. Huh? Lumion was so shocked that he couldn't hide his expression as usual. In the previous cycle, he and Raymond Gregg had met almost every day from the second day of March 30th until April 5th Lent. Back then, they had followed the waterside ritual procedure to lift Raymond, who had thrown the last offering, and throw him into the river. Like the others in the past, Raymond swam further away, and could only return home after leaving the ritual site. He wouldn't leave the house until night. In the 2 cycles that followed, Lumion had too much to do and didn't have time to find Raimund. But now, Ava was telling him that Raimund was missing today. This was something that had never happened in the previous cycle. Upon seeing Lumion's expression, Ava's aqua blue eyes cleared of confusion. You really have no idea. Raimund's father may come to you today to ask where Raimund has gone. Lumion suppressed the tumultuous waves in his heart and asked, when did Raimund disappear? Could it be that something happened, because I didn't follow the historical process of finding him? 2 days ago, Ava recalled. It's said that he didn't return after leaving the house in the afternoon of the 29th. His family assumed he was at Old Tavern, or chatting with the Green Watchers. They only began searching for him last night. They should be asking you today. She paused and lowered her voice. They suspect Raimund of sneaking away, because he doesn't want to learn how to shepherd. They think I instigated him, and are questioning me later? Lumion roughly understood what had happened. The afternoon of the 29th reminded him of the beginning of the cycle. The last 2 cycles had started on the afternoon of the 29th. In other words, Raimund disappeared from the beginning of the cycle? This means that perhaps no one deliberately changed the course of history, because it was too late. Then why is there such an anomaly in difference? Lumion fell into deep thought. Ava glanced at him and asked softly, do you know where Raimund went? I haven't seen him in the past few days, Lumion said truthfully. He began to suspect that Raimund's disappearance had something to do with being thrown into the river during the previous cycle. However, it was impossible for Raimund to leave Cordu because of this. That would trigger the loop. After bidding farewell to Ava, Lumion forced himself to remain calm and returned home. He couldn't be bothered to discuss anything else. Initially, he divulged Raimund's disappearance to Aurora. Aurora's countenance turned solemn as she furrowed her brows and whispered, if you hadn't mentioned it, I would have completely forgotten about this person. She donned a simple rose-red dress and paced back and forth. Lumion began to contemplate potential reasons. After a while, Aurora gazed at her brother and uttered solemnly, I recollect that the crux of the Lent waterside ritual is to offer sacrifices to the concept of a water source symbolized by the river. Is it probable that Raimund, who was thrown into the water, was also regarded as a sacrifice and was taken away by a certain entity? Subsequently, as there was no corresponding tangible reward, the cycle portrayed his absence as a disappearance. Lumion shook his head. That will trigger the cycle. Humans departing Cordu and the surrounding vicinity acted as a trigger. Aurora asked in a profound voice, what if it's in the form of a corpse? In the form of a corpse? Lumion's heart sank upon hearing that. If Raimund's body had left the loop due to the sacrifice, he wouldn't be able to revive through the loop. Once the abnormality in Cordu was resolved, he would truly be dead, and not just missing. Although Lumion wasn't willing to admit that a foolish chap like Raimund was his friend, they had known each other for almost 5 years. They had played together, pranked together, and experienced many things together. Regardless, he couldn't treat him as a stranger. Recalling the past, he realized that other than Aurora, Raimund was probably the person he interacted with the most. Didn't Aurora often say that the fools are the lucky ones? Why is this happening? Lumion couldn't help but retort. Even if he became a corpse, there will still be a spirit. It will trigger the cycle. Aurora sighed softly. Perhaps the entity receiving the sacrifice isn't interested in spirits, and only wants flesh and blood? Perhaps he didn't want to trigger the loop, and only wanted flesh and blood instead of Raimund's spirit, leaving him in Cordu or directly destroying him. In that case, Raimund's corpse was equivalent to pure matter without any spirituality. It could leave the loop without triggering a reboot. Upon hearing his sister's retort, Lumion's mind instantly replayed what might have happened. After everyone left the water, Raimund swam further away. Suddenly, an invisible force grabbed his legs, covered his mouth, and dragged him to the depths of the river, where he drowned. After that, his spirit would remain at the bottom of the river, or be destroyed. His corpse would drift to an unknown place, and become a sacrifice. At this thought, Lumion suddenly became inspired. Regardless of whether Raimund's spirit was left behind or destroyed, once the cycle restarts, he should appear in the form of a ghost. Logically speaking, that's correct. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. After dark, I'll hold a psychic ritual and see if I can find Raimund's spirit. Yes, it's best if we have something he often uses as a medium. Lumion replied without hesitation. After exploring the castle in the afternoon, I'll go to Raimund's place. His parents are looking for me to ask about his whereabouts anyway. When the time came, with his hunter skills and Lumion's vigilance, it wouldn't be difficult for him to obtain an item that Raimund had used. Okay. Aurora didn't object. Lumion exhaled and asked, Aurora, a grande sir, are you capable of channeling spirits? As a mystery prior, I possess knowledge on various subjects. Aurora chuckled in self-deprecation. How did your conversation with the three foreigners go? Lumion quickly recounted his discussion with the enigmatic lady and his conversation with Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, but he avoided mentioning the entity's prayer. Aurora listened attentively and let out a sigh. It's perilous to actively resist corruption, but it's the only way to explore the dream ruins, uncover their secrets, and find the key to break the cycle. It'll be a difficult journey for you. What's so terrible about it? Lumion patted his chest. I'm saving myself. Aurora nodded slightly. You can use my gray amber perfume. We have lilac at home, and I also have deer musk and candle-making ingredients. Only tulips need to be acquired elsewhere. I remember Madame Puali's has a garden, but I don't know if it's blooming. It has bloomed, Lumion affirmed with certainty. During the last cycle, when he and Aurora visited the castle to borrow the carriage, they noticed that many flowers in the garden had already bloomed, which was unusual for early spring in the mountains. Aurora acknowledged tersely. Regardless, you must explore the castle in the afternoon. You can pick a few flowers while you're at it. Will that woman send those items into the dream ruins for you? Yes, Lumion replied, feeling confident in his assumption. Aurora pondered for a moment before saying, I'll give you the integrity brooch before you depart this afternoon. Madame Puali's castle is filthy, and it might involve the undead. It could be very useful. It's not necessary. Keep it with you to protect yourself from Madame Puali's, Lumion insisted, anticipating his sister's objections. Valentine is a fanatical believer of the eternal blazing Sunday. According to you as a beyonder, he should have chosen the sun pathway. He would be more useful than the integrity brooch. Based on Aurora's observations over the past few years, fanatical believers of the eternal blazing sun typically chose the sun pathway. This also made sense. Eternal blazing sun believers who chose the sun pathway tended to become more and more fanatical unless they didn't believe in this true God from the beginning. That's true, Aurora conceded. You can practice the simplest way to activate spirit vision. Afterward, take a nap at noon to replenish your energy. I'll teach you the ancient Hermes and Hermes words required for the ritual tonight. Upon hearing his sister's words, Lumion suddenly recalled something she often said when she was rushing her manuscripts. The schedule is tight, and the task is enormous. At 3:20 p.m., Lumion stood on the hillside overlooking the administrator's castle when he spotted Madame Puali's approaching the village with her lady's maid, Kathy. Madame Puali's wore a stunning grayish-blue dress that had a slight fluffiness to it, and her hair was tied back in an elegant bun. As soon as they were out of sight, Lumion hurried to the back of the hill where Ryan, Leah, and Valentine were already waiting. They appeared to be in their original clothes, having made no preparations for what was to come. Lumion was surprised to see that they were unarmed and asked, You're not carrying any weapons? Ryan, who was only slightly taller than 1.7 meters, smiled and replied, I don't need to carry a weapon with me. Valentine, dressed in a white vest and a thin blue tweed coat, echoed Ryan's sentiment, I don't need a weapon. Leah, on the other hand, pulled out a small, exquisite, silver revolver from her Marseillan boots. This is my weapon. She flipped open the barrel to reveal different colored bullets engraved with various patterns and symbols. They have different beyonder effects. Pa. Leah snapped the barrel shut and asked Lumion with a smile, What weapon did you bring? One of you doesn't need a weapon, the other doesn't need to carry a weapon with him, and one has such a good-looking and powerful revolver. It makes me look silly. He lifted the dark jacket on his back to reveal an iron-black axe tucked into his belt. Without waiting for Ryan and the others to speak, he sighed and said, "You all act like Beyonders. And I'm like a gangster preparing for a fight." Leah chuckled, her bells tinkling along. "You have a talent for self-deprecation. It's better than being mocked by others." Lumion pointed to the steep hill behind them. "Let's climb up now. We can't waste any more time." "All right." Leah, in her tight dress, was the first to climb. She moved with agility, and her balance was exceptional. Using the grooves in the terrain, she ascended the hill with ease. What was even more remarkable was that the 4 silver bells on her person remained motionless and silent. Lumion followed closely behind, using the hunter potion to strengthen his body, and scaling the previously unclimbable hill with the help of rocks and tree roots. Although he wasn't as carefree and nimble as his companion. After regaining his balance, he glanced back and witnessed Ryan seizing Valentine's shoulder and hoisting him up. In a swift motion, Ryan vaulted onto a jutting boulder amidst the hill. Without hesitation, he sprang forward once more, delivering Valentine to Lumion and Leah's vicinity. Throughout the entire endeavor, his physique appeared to have expanded in size. This left Lumion in awe. Although the hill wasn't high, it was still too exaggerated to be scaled with just 2 jumps. Hunters definitely couldn't do it. After snapping out of his daze, Lumion looked at the castle-shaped building with 2 towers and the surrounding garden. He suggested to the 3 foreigners, "We'll go around to the back door." "Wait a moment." Ryan stopped him and glanced at Leah. Leah remained silent and strode 2 steps towards the rear entrance of the castle-like structure. Her lips moved soundlessly, muttering something under her breath. In the next instant, the 4 small silver bells attached to her veil and boots jingled. The sound was not deafening, but it was urgent and intense. Leah pivoted and addressed Lumion and the rest. "It's a treacherous path. A grave problem indeed." With that, she took 2 steps towards the front entrance. Ding ding ding. The bells continued to ring, growing even more insistent and pressing. "We'll likely encounter significant trouble if we attempt to enter through the front." Leah's tone was severe, but there was a hint of a smile on her face. "What if we climb in through a window?" Ryan inquired. Leah nodded and altered course, making her way towards the garden. This time, although the bells rang, they were faint and slow. Leah grinned and exhaled. "This route is safe." Lumion, who had observed the entire process, felt bewildered. He couldn't fathom what the 3 foreigners were up to. "Is this how Beyonders operate?" He recollected his sister's teachings and queried, "Divining the danger?" "Indeed." Leah nodded and turned to Valentine. "I'll scout ahead. Be prepared." "Understood," Valentine responded gravely. "What preparations?" Lumion asked, confused. Leah chuckled. "Prepare to cast divine spells and conjure flames." "Then, what's the purpose of creating flames?" Before Lumion could ask, Leah had strolled into the garden and headed towards the castle. She arrived at a window and signaled that everything was clear. "Let's go," Ryan informed the group as he hastened towards Leah. Valentine and Lumion followed closely behind. As they passed a bed of tulips, Lumion reached out to pluck one, but Ryan stopped him with his forearm. He didn't ask Lumion why he was doing this and only said gently, "There's no hurry. We can pick flowers later. If picking it causes some incident, our mission will be compromised." "That's true." Lumion fully drew upon this experience. Soon, they arrived at a row of windows on the side of the castle. The administrator's official residence was originally the castle of the Dirige nobles, with defense being the top priority. The windows were narrow and high up, making the lighting poor even during the day. However, to make it suitable for living, the owner had installed many new glass windows on the ground floor later on. Lumion peered through the patterned glass and saw that the banquet hall was empty and deserted. "There are very few servants." Leah sighed softly. With many open windows during the day, fresh air mixed with the fragrance of flowers flowed in, creating excellent conditions for Lumion and the others to infiltrate. Taking advantage of the lack of servants on the first floor, the 4 of them climbed into the hall one after another. However, they didn't rush to go deeper and instead found a hiding spot nearby. Leah turned her head towards Valentine, who was clinging close behind an ornamental pillar, and said, "I'll scout ahead. Make preparations." "Okay," Valentine nodded coldly. Lumian was squatting behind a stone platform with a porcelain vase. When he heard this, he stuck his head out and reminded them, "There's no need to explore the first floor. It's often used to entertain guests, so there's nothing unusual." Ever since Administrator Beast and Madame Pualis moved in, his sister Aurora would visit the castle occasionally as a guest or borrow a pony. A few times, Lumian took the opportunity to follow her and freeload on cakes, bread, and drinks. When the administrator and Madame Pualis were out, he would occasionally look for Louis Lund, the butler, and tour the first floor with him. "I'll head straight to the stairs," Leah said, understanding. She didn't attempt to walk in a straight line through the empty banquet hall. Instead, she hugged the wall and circled around towards the stairs. The 4 silver bells remained eerily silent. As she passed by one of the rooms, she suddenly heard footsteps approaching from very close to the door. Lumian, in a prime position, even caught a glimpse of a male servant in a red shirt and white pants, about to collide head-on with Leah. She had no cover in sight. Leah didn't panic. She turned around, placed her hand on the wall, and scaled the oil painting hanging 2 meters above the ground. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and stepped onto the frame. She stood firmly with her back against the wall without letting the oil painting drop. Lumian wanted to applaud because it reminded him of an acrobatic performance he had seen in Dirige last year at a circus. The male servant left the room and instinctively looked around before walking towards the kitchen. Just as he took a few steps forward, Leah slid soundlessly to the ground against the oil painting. Then she rolled twice and hid behind a pillar. After the male servant disappeared from the banquet hall, she leaned against the wall again. Finally, she arrived at the staircase and confirmed that everything was clear. Upon seeing this, Lumian darted out of the stone platform and ran over in a straight line. He was so fast that he reached Leah in less than 3 seconds. However, he wasn't the fastest. Ryan completed the journey in just the time it took to take one breath. Valentine wasn't slow either. His physique was clearly stronger than ordinary people. Without another word, Leah took the lead, and the 4 of them hurriedly entered the stairs, arriving at the 2nd floor of the residence. There were closed rooms on both sides of the corridor, with 2 rooms having light shine in through the windows at the end of the corridor. The overall environment was abnormally dark. "Let us split up and search different rooms. This will save time and make it easier to hide. However, we must remain no more than 1 room apart from each other, in case something happens and we cannot save each other in time," Ryan suggested, surveying their surroundings. Leah and the others nodded in agreement. Lumian promptly approached the nearest room, pressing his ear to the door to listen for any movement inside. After a moment, he deftly turned the handle and slipped inside. The room belonged to a maid. He searched for a while, but found no clues. He moved on to the next room. In this way, the 4 of them carefully avoided the servants and explored most of the 2nd floor. Towards the end of their search, Lumian arrived at the door of the room that had traumatized him, Louis Lund's bedroom. According to the historical sequence of events, this butler should have given birth yesterday. His stomach had been torn open, and, even with sutures, he would not recover quickly. He must be recuperating in bed, Lumian thought to himself, contemplating whether to push the door open and have a chat with Louis Lund. As someone who had personally experienced bizarre phenomena, this male butler undoubtedly knew a great deal. However, this would contradict their principle of observation and exploration. Lumian couldn't guarantee that Louis Lund wouldn't reveal his presence to Madame Pualis. The fact that he had given birth to the other party's child meant there were no secrets between them. Silencing him would only confirm Madame Pualis' suspicions. What a pity. If only I knew something about hypnosis. Lumian sighed inwardly. He habitually pressed his ear to the door, listening for any sound. Nothing. As a hunter, Lumian's hearing was acute enough to detect breathing from 2 to 3 meters away, even with a barrier in between. No one. Louis Lund has just given birth. Where can he go? Lumian turned the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open, peering inside. The room was clean and free of the bloodstains he had seen before. Louis Lund was nowhere to be found. Lumian furrowed his brow and stepped inside. The signs of a recent human presence were evident. A blanket rumpled on the bed, a cigarette butt on the nightstand, a black coat hung on the chair, and faint footprints on the floor. In addition, there were blood stains on the edge of the bed that had not been cleaned. Apart from this, Lumian also saw some blood stains that hadn't been wiped off from the edge of the bed. Lumian nodded to himself. He had indeed given birth here yesterday. Suddenly, faint voices outside the window caught his attention. He hurried to the glass window, turned his body, and peered out. In the stables, Louis Lund, black-haired, blue-eyed, and dressed in a white shirt, black suit, dark pants, and leather shoes, conversed with the carriage driver Sewell, who had sent the siblings to Permitha. Lumian was taken aback by Louis Lund's healthy and steady appearance. Is this the person who had just given birth yesterday? And it was a C-section. Lumian suppressed the shock in his heart and listened carefully to what Louis Lund and Sewell were saying. Unexpectedly, these two fellows were only exchanging experiences in gardening. What's the matter? With Lumian inside the room for so long, Ryan, donning a dark bowler hat, pushed open the door and entered the room followed by Leah and Valentine. Lumian quickly filled them in on Louis Lund's situation. Ryan pondered for a moment before asking, "Have you heard of Earth Mother?" The Dirige region had a border with the Fainapotter Kingdom. Shepherds often went there. Coupled with his sister's basic education, Lumian was no stranger to this. Yes, the deity that Fainapotter believes in. Ryan nodded and said, Earth Mother is associated with fertility, healing, and life. These domains are reflected in the beyonder powers of the corresponding pathway. While I'm not saying that Louis Lund's situation is related to the Earth Mother, it's possible that his ability to give birth and quick recovery are linked to these domains. Is that so? Lumian found this plausible after some thought. After all, men were already capable of giving birth. What was so strange about them being out and about after a C-section? Did you find anything? Lumian asked Ryan and the others. Ryan shook his head. They were all normal servants' quarters. We may have to check the third floor. Lumian felt a sense of unease wash over him. Madame Puali's and Administrator Beast's quarters comprised a bedroom, study, solarium, and activity room, all located on the third floor. This posed a significant risk. Very well, Ryan replied without hesitation. The four of them proceeded to sneak up to the third floor. Many of the doors were ajar, and the corridor was brightly lit. Lumian made a beeline for the bedroom, which was adorned with a light-colored velvet blanket on the bed, a small bookshelf stocked with bedtime reading materials, a capacious cloakroom brimming with a variety of clothes, a safe containing precious collections, a set of plush beige sofas, a table displaying 5 photo frames and documents, and a fluffy white carpet covering the entire room. Lumian and company surveyed the room and simultaneously headed towards the table. The books on the table were mostly popular novels, including Furzwall's masterpiece, The Adventurer 5, Vice Admiral Ailment, and Aurora's latest work, The Substitute Detective. The documents pertained mainly to various matters in the Dirige area. As for the 5 photos displayed in the frames, 4 were of Madame Puali's, and 1 belonged to a man Lumian did not recognize. No photo of the administrator, he exclaimed, surprised. Madame Puali's was the sole subject of the 4 photos, each depicting her in different clothing and poses. The male photo was not of Administrator Beast, who, after all, was the male owner of the house. Wasn't this peculiar? Leah nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps the administrator's status in this family is akin to that of a butler. Have you ever seen a butler's photograph displayed in someone's home? Then who is this man? Lumian inquired, pointing to the photo frame on the side. The frame contained a color photograph of a man in his late 20s. He was wearing a red shirt, a black velvet coat, and dark pants with tassels. He sported a pair of short lace-up boots and was dressed very fashionably. He bore a striking resemblance to Madame Puali's, with light eyebrows, bright brown eyes, and brown hair parted in an exaggerated 7-3 style. His lips were curled up, giving him the air of a hooligan who frequented high society. All in all, this man's facial features were not extraordinary, but they were pleasing to the eye. Madame Puali's brother? Lumian hazarded a guess based on his appearance. Leah gazed at the man in the photo, lost in thought. After receiving the request for help, we set off 2 days later to gather relevant information, she said. Madame Puali's full name is Puali's de Roquefort. Isn't it? She paused for a moment before continuing. We investigated the Roquefort family in Dirige and found no trace of Pualis. In Intis, a woman could choose to keep her maiden name after getting married. If there was Abdo in her name, it meant that she was once a noble. The Intis meaning of da was from, and the surname behind it was the fiefdom of the time. None. Lumian was surprised. He knew something was wrong with Madame Pualis, but he didn't expect her identity to be fake. Ryan nodded. In Dirige, Roquefort is a large family with many members, including a provincial senator. We were in a hurry and didn't have time to conduct a more detailed investigation. We could only confirm that there was no such person as Pualis, but a man named Pulet had been missing for over a year. Pulet? Lumian asked. What's his relationship with Madame Pualis? They look alike. Ryan shook his head. Without enough information, it's impossible to make a guess. What we do know is that Pulet de Roquefort was a popular dandy in Trier, and he had many illegitimate children. Many people hated and detested him. Perhaps this is why he had no choice but to leave or was forced to leave Dirige. Dandyism? Lumian was unfamiliar with the term. Aurora subscribed to magazines and newspapers targeted towards women or focused on national affairs. There were some materials on the supernatural, but none involved male matters. Leah chuckled. To put it simply, it's a Casanova who dresses fashionably, speaks elegantly and acts freely. Lumian sighed and mocked. Trierians sure know how to live life. They package their affairs as a thought, a doctrine, and a trend. When it came to cheating, Trierians were at the forefront. The Padre. In front of the Trierians he was still a child. In the past year, Trier has constructed numerous arcades, Aurora remarked while sipping her marquee black tea, regaling Madame Pualis, Naisley and the others with the latest trends from her two-story subterranean abode. What's an arcade? It's a covered street with glass roofing and marble flooring. Elegant and stunning shops line both sides. During the day, light filters in from above, and at night, gas lamps illuminate the area. Carriages are prohibited from entering. The most renowned arcade is called the Opera House Arcade. Madame Pualis, holding a white porcelain cup filled with black tea, watched Aurora with her bright brown eyes, listening intently with a smile. That sounds like something I must see. Naisley sighed, imagining the elegance, fashion, cleanliness, and brightness of the arcade. Aurora's knowledge of the latest Intis trends was the primary reason why they had accepted the afternoon tea invitation. After chatting for a while, the discussion turned to Aurora's work and relationships. Love is just so unfathomable and elusive. Madame Pualis mused aloud. So, this is why you fall in love with so many men at the same time? Aurora couldn't help but inwardly criticize. Madame Pualis gazed at her with a faint smile and sighed. Sometimes I get so angry because of his mistakes. I wish I could kill him and send him to his death. But when he's actually facing death, I can't help but save him and refuse to tell him. Perhaps this is love. In the master's bedroom of the administrator's residence, Madame Pualis may have once fallen in love with Pulet, a believer in dandyism, and engaged in a forbidden relationship, resulting in her disavowal by her family. She then had to marry someone and use her family's connections to secure the administrative position in Cordoue for him. Lumian deduced this based on the stories and tropes written by his sister. This explained why Administrator Beast's standing in the family was relatively low. Perhaps, Ryan replied simply, keep searching, but don't attempt to open the safe or anything that may trigger an alarm. Lumian and his companions dispersed immediately and searched elsewhere. Despite the hunter's ability to observe subtle traces, Lumian still found nothing. The same was true for Leah and the others. They had no choice but to move to the study and search patiently. As time passed, the four of them arrived at the end of the corridor, where a closed room stood opposite an open solarium. Beside it was a staircase leading to one of the towers. Ryan, who had finished searching the solarium, turned to Leah. Leah touched the small silver bell hanging from her veil, mumbling to herself as she walked towards the tightly shut wooden door. This time, the 4 bells did not ring. Leah heaved a sigh of relief and gently pushed the wooden door open. It was an empty room with a rocking crib in the middle. The crib was made of brown wood and installed inside a wooden frame. It was covered in clean but slightly worn cotton swaddling cloth that showed its age. The crib was empty. This was the nursery where Madame Puali's 2 children had once slept. Apart from the bed, there were no toys in the room. Scattered on the ground were wheat, barley, rice, rye, wheat, and other plants, making it look rather strange. Furthermore, these plants were well preserved, as if they had only been brought in a few days ago. Valentine's body glowed as he entered the room and circled around. Soon, he returned to the door and shook his head at Ryan and Leah. "There's no evil aura." "All right." Leah looked at Lumion. "Shall we head to the tower next?" Lumion had always been curious about the castle's 2 towers. He never expected to have a chance to visit them today. Valentine left the strange nursery. Ryan grabbed the handle and planned to close the wooden door and restore it to its original state. At this moment, Lumion's gaze drifted inside. The brown wooden crib swayed gently, yet the tightly shut windows of the room and the solarium opposite, with their floor-to-ceiling panes, allowed no breeze to enter the corridor. Lumion's pupils dilated. Leah noticed his distress and turned to look. The crib continued to sway, as though an invisible baby lay within its swaddling cloths. Leah raised her hand to her glabella, as if trying to ease her tired eyes. She readied herself to activate her spirit vision and see what lay inside the crib. Suddenly, the 4 small silver bells on her veil and boots jingled, as if they were about to burst. Ryan's face froze as he yelled, "Get out of here!" With that, he dashed into the solarium, crashing through the floor-to-ceiling windows in an attempt to create a path of escape from the castle. Bang! A loud thud echoed throughout the room as Ryan hit the windows, yet there was no sound of glass shattering. The transparent faces of young children appeared on the row of windows, some of them mere infants with pale, inexplicably terrifying faces. As Ryan bumped into them, they opened their mouths in unison and let out a haunting wail. Their cries echoed through the 3rd floor of the castle, casting an eerie gloom over the entire area. The walls and glass were adorned with the translucent faces of children, some wailing while others stared blankly at Lumion, Leah, Valentine, and Ryan. Lumion shuddered with fear as he felt their cold gazes upon him. Suddenly, Valentine's body was engulfed in a dark golden light, which quickly spread to envelop Lumion, Leah, and himself. A warm sensation spread throughout Lumion's body, dispelling his fear and filling him with courage. He drew his iron-black axe with newfound confidence. Meanwhile, Ryan seemed to grow taller and more imposing. Dawn-like rays of light surrounded him, coalescing into a silver-white full-body armor and a massive broadsword of light. With a mighty swing, Ryan cleaved at the floor-to-ceiling windows, dispersing the pale white faces of the children into smoke as they screamed. But the glass didn't break, and more faces appeared, their shrill cries tormenting Lumion and his companions. "Who dares to trespass the castle?" A woman's voice boomed, echoing through the halls. Almost immediately, Lumion spotted a figure on the other side of the corridor, standing on the 2nd floor. She was a middle-aged woman with brown hair and eyes. She was rather good-looking without any wrinkles. She was the midwife who had helped Louis Lund's delivery. In her hand, she held a pair of enormous scissors that could decapitate a human while donning a grayish-white gown. It was as if she had just returned from pruning a branch in the garden. She glared at Lumion and his companions and spoke in a deep, threatening voice. "You deserve to die." In the subterranean 2-story abode, Madame Puali's jolted suddenly, and her countenance altered. She delicately placed the porcelain teacup on the table and smiled at Aurora. "My apologies. I've just recollected an urgent matter that requires my immediate attention at home." "Huh." Aurora was shocked. Puali's rose from her seat, her expression filled with regret. "I had intended to stay and discuss your work, and its beautiful and poignant portrayal of love." Aurora responded quickly, "Please, you're more than welcomed." "I cannot, unfortunately." Madame Puali shook her head. "It concerns my children." Valentine caught sight of the woman in the grayish-white dress. His eyes brimmed with hatred as he stretched his arms out, as if embracing the sun. A blinding pillar of light descended from the sky and struck the target clutching the enormous scissors. The surroundings burst into light in an instant. The transparent faces on the walls and glass vanished before they could even scream. The woman's body had clearly caught fire and was evaporating, but then it suddenly vanished. Lumion found this scene eerily familiar. The mouth orifice monster had displayed similar behavior when he was hunting it. Invisibility. The woman might not have concealed herself, but she certainly wasn't dead. Thus, Lumion didn't feel any relief. Instead, he approached Ryan, who now towered over him. Ryan, covered in silver armor and wielding a broadsword of light, was the person Lumion trusted the most among those present. It was evident that Ryan excelled at combat. Leah stood there when suddenly, the face of a pale child emerged on the wall behind her, transforming into the woman in the grayish-white dress. The woman's enormous scissors clamped down on Leah's neck. Crack! Leah's head drooped, but no blood spurted forth. Her body and head swiftly shriveled and thinned, transforming into a ragged paper effigy that softly settled onto the ground. Not far away, her silhouette donning a pleated cashmere dress outlined itself. With a clang, Ryan, his face concealed by a silver visor, hoisted the Sword of Dawn and strode towards the spot where Leah had stood, sweeping the weapon diagonally at the woman. The woman brandished her scissors in an attempt to block the attack, but was pushed back into the wall by the force of the blow. Her form vanished once again, as Valentine, clad in a thin blue tweed jacket, stood with his back turned. The woman suddenly replaced the swollen and pallid visage. She leaned out and struck the nape of Valentine's neck. "Look out!" Leah cried out as soon as she spotted the woman, alerting her companion. Valentine snorted and crossed his arms. Golden, illusory flames burst forth from the void surrounding him, intertwining and transforming the corridor into an ocean pulsating with the radiance of the sun. The woman winced in agony as her body was consumed by the intense flames. She retreated back into the interior of the walls, reverting to the swollen, pallid face. The translucent face melted instantly into wisps of black gas within the golden, illusory flames before dissipating. Clang! Ryan's Sword of Dawn struck the same spot again, causing the entire castle to tremble. Despite his efforts, he was still a step too late to stop the woman. Lumion quickly grasped the gravity of the situation. The woman who had delivered Louis Lund was linked to the transparent faces of children on the wall and glass. Not only could she transform into one of them, but she could also transform into a ghost form, evading attacks and deflecting damage. In other words, she could attack from any wall or glass on the third floor of the castle at any given time. And Ryan and the others' counterattacks were ineffective. With this realization, Lumion immediately distanced himself from the floor-to-ceiling windows and the surrounding walls, and walked to the middle of the solarium. At that moment, ghostly faces appeared on the ground and ceiling. The woman suddenly emerged from behind Lumion's feet, and quickly reached for his thigh with the pair of scissors. Lumion's heart raced with a sense of danger. Without bothering to confirm where the attack was coming from, he jumped into the air and dodged to the side. Despite his efforts, he was still half a beat too slow. A deep gash was left on the lower part of his thigh, and blood instantly gushed out. As soon as the drops of blood landed on the ground, the woman, who had switched spots, pointed at them and they condensed into a thin blood-colored figure. Without any hesitation, the blood-colored figure turned to Lumion, who had rolled to the recliner, and pounced at him, feeding on his blood, and growing stronger with each drop. At the same time, Lumion endured intense pain, and felt his blood running out of control. Almost instantly, Ryan jumped in. In midair, he raised the broadsword of light high and slashed at the blood-colored figure, pinning it to the ground and shattering it with the transparent faces around him. Leah had somersaulted to Lumion's side, and pressed her right hand on his thigh wound. To Lumion's surprise, the wound magically moved along with Leah's right palm, all the way down to the side of his calf, which wasn't rich in blood vessels. The bleeding immediately decreased. The woman suddenly appeared from the ceiling. Her brown eyes burned with a blazing life. The blood dripping from Lumion's calf was ignited, producing a bright flame that resembled the spring sun. It quickly spread deep into the wound, and into the blood vessels in his body. At that moment, Lumion felt his life rapidly draining away. With a pop, Ryan stabbed the two-handed broadsword condensed from light into the ground. Around him, in the area where Lumion and Leah were, rays of dawn-like light appeared, filling all space. In the morning light, the remaining blood-colored figures quickly melted, and the bright and beautiful flames on Lumien's calf quickly extinguished. The second of burning had sealed his wounds together, stopping the bleeding. Ryan pulled out his broadsword and bellowed in a deep, commanding voice. "This environment is unsuitable. We must depart at once." What he really meant was that the woman was not as powerful as she appeared. She was almost invincible and impossible to target, due to the unique conditions on the third floor of the castle that greatly enhanced her abilities. Without waiting for his companions to react, Ryan charged after the woman. Although he was still slightly slower than his opponent, who could move with the aid of translucent faces, he spared no effort and attacked with powerful slashes, diagonal cuts, and stabs. He forced his adversary into a constant state of motion, forcing her to constantly shift positions after each attack. Together with the holy light summoned by Valentine and the golden flames he conjured, the two of them managed to temporarily subdue the woman, thus preventing Leah and Lumien from being harmed. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Leah leapt onto the armchair and dashed back and forth across the sofa, tables, recliners, and ornaments, making sure to avoid touching the ground. Throughout this process, the silver bells on her veil and boots chimed incessantly, sometimes melodious and sometimes grating. Lumien no longer felt safe on the ground. He climbed onto the table and scanned the ceiling above and the floor below, analyzing Leah's movements. Drawing from his previous experience, he deduced the route the woman was attempting to use to escape. Soon Leah ceased her acrobatic maneuvers. To the tower quickly. Just as she finished speaking, the woman thrust her head out of the ceiling and barked in a stern voice, "You damned bastards." Each word was enunciated with precision, causing Lumien and his companions' hearts to race, their heads to spin, and their vision to blur. It was a thoroughly unpleasant experience. Valentine endured the discomfort and stretched his arms out once more. A brilliant and pristine light flooded the ceiling. "Let's move," Ryan commanded. Lumien immediately leaped off the table, enduring the pain in his calf. Stepping on the transparent faces, he raced towards the tower, with Leah and Valentine close behind. Only Ryan, covered in silver armor, wasn't in a rush to escape. He lifted the Sword of Dawn and sliced the woman who had poked her head out, preventing her from stopping his companions from fleeing. After Leah and the others ascended the stairs leading to the tower, he turned around and gave chase with a leap. A woman emerged from a transparent face on the side wall and let out a piercing scream. Accompanied by the scream, a layer of black, malevolent flames ignited on the surface of Ryan's silver armor. Ryan immediately felt his stamina rapidly depleting. Without hesitation, he deactivated the dawn armor. Spots of light resembling the morning sun scattered in all directions, along with the black flames, and dissipated into the air. Holding the broadsword of light, Ryan took the opportunity to leap and depart from the castle's third floor, entering the stairs. At this moment Lumien, aware that he was a little weak and unable to make use of the environment, ran in second place. Ahead of him was Leah, whose silver bell was ringing softly. Leah suddenly came to a halt. Lumien hastily slowed down as he heard chattering. He then looked ahead and was taken aback. The tower was not large, and it could even be considered small. There were stairs leading to various firing ports. The walls were densely packed with children. They were dressed in different clothes. Some appeared to have just been born, while others were 3 or 4 years old. Their limbs resembled bird claws with unnaturally sharp tips. Using their bird claws, these children were like birds in a forest, perching on the wall and occupying most of the area. Lumien's scalp tingled as he saw over 100 human children's faces, bodies, and wicked, sharp bird claws combined with an abnormal perching method. He once again felt as though his mind, eyes, and soul had been corrupted, just as when he had witnessed Louis Lund give birth. The children had not yet noticed the intrusion. A small number of them were happily discussing different topics. "The sky is so blue out there. I want to go outside." "No way. Mummy said we have to be able to retract our claws and be like normal humans before we can go out." At that moment, Ryan caught up to the 3 of them and said urgently, "Stay away." He then turned around and barricaded the entrance of the tower like a giant, holding the Sword of Dawn in his hand. Leah and Valentine didn't inquire why. They ran frantically and found stairs and other obstacles to hide behind. Although Lumion didn't comprehend, his survival instincts told him to follow orders. "All of you come down here." The woman's sharp voice reverberated. Each word drilled into Lumion and his companion's ears, weakening them simultaneously. Immediately afterwards, the woman in the grayish-white dress appeared at the corner of the staircase. The entire tower was filled with the aura of life, and no pale faces were visible. Upon seeing that Ryan was blocking the entrance of the tower with the Sword of Dawn, the woman in the grayish-white dress felt a sense of foreboding. She swiftly turned the enormous scissors around, clamped them around her neck, and pulled gently. A vivid red stream of blood gushed out immediately, accompanied by her sharp cry. The blood flowed in every direction as if it had a life of its own, enveloping her entire body. It was as though the woman had adorned herself with blood-colored full-body armor. Meanwhile, Ryan held the Sword of Dawn in reverse with both hands and genuflected. With a pop, he stabbed the two-handed broadsword, which had condensed from light, into the stone floor in front of him. The broadsword disintegrated, transforming into specks of light that resembled the morning sun. They were densely packed and innumerable, forming a flickering and violent hurricane that swept forward. Wherever the hurricane of light passed, the stone floor was shaved thin. Some of the steps were flattened, and exaggerated cracks appeared. The woman was completely engulfed before she could dodge. The blood-colored armor on her body lasted for a second before completely shattering and melting into the light. This time, she had left the special environment on the third floor and was in a place filled with life force. She could no longer use the pale and transparent faces to shift position. She could only watch as tiny blood-colored cracks appeared on her body. The cracks expanded rapidly and instantly turned into a hideous wound that cut through the woman. As her screams reverberated, her body crumbled into pieces of flesh. The pieces of flesh and her spirit were still being ravaged by the storm of light until the hurricane subsided. The flesh was ground, and the spirit dissipated. Although Ryan tried his best to prevent the hurricane of light from implicating the others, he was still too weak to control it. He destroyed a large swath of the walls on the side and the stairs behind him. If Lumion, Leah, and Valentine hadn't found cover in advance, they would have more or less been injured. Wah! 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 The bird-clawed children who were climbing the wall were frightened and cried out. Lumion and the others' ears buzzed, as if they had suffered a noise attack. "Let's go!" Ryan turned around and slammed into the most damaged wall nearby. Crash! The wall shattered, and a large number of rocks fell. A huge hole that humans could crawl through appeared. When Valentine and Lumion ran over, Ryan grabbed each of them with one hand and jumped from a height of more than 10 meters to a tree outside the castle. Bam! In midair, he kicked the tree and flew diagonally away from the castle. Leah descended on her own, using the protrusion of the castle's outer walls to descend rapidly, landing on the ground in a breath or two. Ryan, Lumion, and Valentine waited for Leah for a few seconds as the trees shook violently. After meeting up with her, they ran to the back of the hill and left before the other servants caught up. In less than a minute, Madame Puali stood expressionless beside the ruptured hole at the entrance of the tower, wearing a grayish-blue fluffy dress. The children crawling on the walls quickly accused the outsiders of being barbaric and cruel, calling out for their mother. Madame Pualis, with an ashen face, remained silent. In the forest beside Coeur de Village, Lumion and his companions stopped and looked back at the castle. Leah was about to speak when she frowned and said, "I hear a baby crying, it's very close." She turned to Ryan and the others and asked, "Can you hear it?" Lumion was startled and listened carefully, vaguely hearing the sound of a baby crying. But it was not as close as Leah had described. In fact, it sounded distant. "I can hear it a little," Ryan answered truthfully. Valentine's expression changed as if he had thought of something. At the same time, Leah's face twisted in pain, and she instinctively pressed a hand to her abdomen, where there was a distinct swelling and squirming. Valentine quickly went over to Leah and placed his hand on her head, saying a word in ancient Hermes that Lumion had just learned. "Sun." Golden translucent liquid drops condensed out of thin air and sprinkled over Leah's body. Illusory black smoke immediately rose from Leah's body, and her expression alternated between distortion and normalcy. Finally, her abdomen returned to its original state and stopped squirming. Phew! Leah breathed a sigh of relief. I narrowly avoided becoming a monster's mother. Luckily, we took care of it in time before it could take root. She wore a smile on her face, unfazed by the bizarre and terrifying experience. Leah turned to Lumion, Ryan and Valentine. Would you like to purify yourselves with holy water? I worry that you may unknowingly become mothers. Yes. Lumion agreed immediately, but Valentine approached Ryan first. Placing his hand on Ryan's head, he uttered the ancient Hermes word, son. Holy water formed and sprinkled down, but nothing unusual happened to Ryan. Valentine purified himself next, and no black smoke appeared. He then walked over to Lumion and placed his hand on the hunter's head. Son, he repeated, and droplets of translucent liquid fell. Lumion suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if a snake were burrowing inside. Each time it moved, Lumion's heart raced or slowed down, causing extreme discomfort. In the next moment, Lumion heard the mysterious voice that seemed to come from an infinite distance, but also sounded close by. It wasn't as clear as in his dream, so it prevented him from entering a near-death state. Just as Lumion couldn't take it anymore, Valentine stopped the purification and nodded coldly. There's nothing wrong with you either. Phew. Lumion breathed a silent sigh of relief, feeling as though he had been pulled back from the brink of death. At that moment, he roughly understood what had just happened. According to the mysterious lady, he was severely corrupted by a certain hidden evil god. He could only maintain his normal state by relying on the timely seal of that great existence. Accepting the purification of holy water was like a devil embracing holy light. He was bound to experience problems. In other words, he was an evil god pollutant that needed to be purified. Thankfully, if Valentine had kept going, or had been a little stronger, I would have exposed my abnormality even with the seal of that great existence. I can't undergo purification in the future. I won't even be able to find someone to exorcise the evil. I'm the evil that needs to be exorcised. Lumion rejoiced and didn't let the remnant pain appear on his face. Upon realizing that his companions had been cleansed and all risks had been eliminated, Ryan promptly suggested, if we make our way to the edge of the village now, we'll activate the loop. In the event that Madame Pualis discovers a clue and catches up with us, we can attempt to flee and restart the cycle. Noticing Valentine's perplexed expression, Ryan added, I'm concerned that if we die once during a cycle, there may be repercussions once the loop is lifted. Therefore, it's best not to perish at this moment. Understood. Leah agreed before Valentine could interject with any radical ideas. Observing that his two companions had arrived at the same conclusion, Valentine simply nodded. At that moment, Lumion glanced at them before waving his hand and declaring, You guys go on ahead. I'm going home. Ryan furrowed his brow in confusion and asked, Aren't you worried that Madame Pualis might come after you? Lumion grinned and replied, I'm not like you. As soon as I entered the tower, I was attempting to avoid the monster children's gaze. They didn't spot me, and the midwife who saw me was killed by you. It seems that even channeling spirits is ineffective. How could Madame Pualis have suspected that a powerful infiltration team like yours had an ordinary person like me with them? Think about it. Prior to your arrival in Cordu, no one had attempted to infiltrate the castle. The moment you arrived, something immediately occurred. Who else could be suspected but you guys? If I escape with you, I'll be dragged down with you. Ryan, Leah, and Valentine were left speechless. This was clearly an operation concocted by Lumion. Why did it appear as though he had nothing to do with it in the end? Were they going to shoulder all the blame? Goodbye. If Madame Pualis doesn't dare to confront official Beyonders like you, and the cycle isn't restarted, I'll see you at Old Tavern tomorrow. Lumion waved his hand and dashed towards the edge of the forest, reminding them, Take care, my cabbages. Once he exited the forest, Lumion's expression became serious. The explanation he provided for not escaping with Ryan and the others wasn't the only reason. It was more of an excuse. His primary objective was to return home immediately and rendezvous with Aurora. As soon as Aurora invited Madame Pualis for afternoon tea, someone snuck into the castle, and they were the prime suspects. Lumion had to inform his sister that if Madame Pualis came to interrogate and silence her, she should sell out the 3 foreigners and agree to Madame Pualis's imprisonment. She could discover and dangle a valuable secret to delay Madame Pualis for a while, preventing her from executing anyone on the spot. Only by staying alive would there be a chance. Even in the loop, Lumion couldn't afford to die easily in case something catastrophic occurred once the loop ended. Furthermore, once Madame Pualis caught up with Leah and the others, if she emerged victorious, one of Ryan and the other 2 would trigger the loop and erase their memories. If she lost, what was there to be concerned about? Lumion gritted his teeth and ran home through the village road, enduring the pain in his calf. Upon seeing Aurora standing at the door, appearing completely unharmed, he breathed a sigh of relief. Is everything all right? Is everything all right? The siblings both inquired simultaneously. In response to his sister's concern, Lumion shook his head and declared, I'm fine. He surveyed his surroundings and suggested, let us talk inside. Upon reaching the stove, he briefly narrated his expedition with Ryan and the others. Lumion then advised his sister that if Madame Pualis were to attack them, she must surrender and betray the 3 foreigners without hesitation. Considering the phenomena he had encountered in the castle, Lumion believed that the siblings could not defeat Madame Pualis. They were not even capable of handling the midwife. Aurora listened attentively and couldn't help but chuckle. From a logical standpoint, your tactics are indeed the best. But why do I find it peculiar? It is as though I have become the villain in a story. Furthermore, I am not the principal antagonist, the charismatic kind. What is important is the consequence, Lumion stressed to his sister. In your own words, one must endure the humiliation, bear the heavy burden, preserve the useful body, and wait for it to prove its worth in the future. Aurora couldn't help but rub her forehead. Have I taught you too many strange things? Yes, Lumion earnestly nodded. Aurora rolled her eyes. Okay, I understand. I will not confront Madame Pualis until the most crucial moment. When Madame Pualis noticed that the alarm had been triggered and attempted to leave, I did not stop her. I merely expressed reluctance and conversed with her for an additional minute. Right. Please elaborate on the specifics of your exploration. She seated herself at the dining table and listened intently, just in case Madame Pualis were to interrogate her in anger. Lumion pulled out a chair on the opposite side of the dining table and expounded on the expedition's accomplishments and battle process. As Aurora listened, her expression gradually became somewhat peculiar. What is the matter? Lumion noticed his sister's abnormality. After considerable deliberation, Aurora inquired with a strange expression. There is a portrait of a man in Madame Pualis' bedroom, and he resembles her. It's suspected that he is her brother. Yes, the 3 foreigners speculated that he might be a missing member of the Roquefort family named Pulet. Lumion recounted Ryan and the other's statements, including dandyism and the vast number of illegitimate children. He added, according to the 3 foreigners' investigation, there is no such person as Pualis in the Roquefort family. Aurora nodded and exhaled. Then I am quite sure that my guess is correct. Her expression remained peculiar, only growing more pronounced. What guess? Lumion asked, perplexed. Aurora gave him a sidelong glance before replying. Perhaps Madame Pualis is actually Pulet. What? That's absurd. Lumion exclaimed. One is a man, the other a woman, and Madame Pualis had 2 children. Who's to say she gave birth to them herself? Maybe the administrator did it for her, Aurora countered, a sneer curling her lip. And even if they are Madame Pualis's children, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. In the world of mysticism, anything is possible. Consider this. If Louis Lund can give birth to a man, then why can't Pulet become a woman? That may be true, but... Lumion was still unconvinced. Aurora gave him a sly smile. The reason I dare to make such a guess, unlike the 3 foreigners, is because I've heard something. Or rather, I've witnessed something. Do you remember which pathway neighbors the Hunter pathway? Assassin, Lumion replied without hesitation. He had been drawn to the name, which was undoubtedly cooler than Hunter. In our organization, the Curly-Haired Baboons Research Society, there was a man who was fascinated by the idea of an assassin and chose that pathway, Aurora explained, her expression growing stranger by the moment. At a gathering, he confided in us with a melancholy and troubled air that the potion an assassin needs to consume after reaching sequence 7 is called which? Lumian had a sinking feeling the moment he heard the potion's name. Yes, witch. In the world of mysticism, warlocks and witches are two entirely different concepts. You used to get them mixed up and call me a witch from time to time. It was rather unsettling, Aurora said, taking the opportunity to enlighten him. Drinking the witch potion will turn you into a witch. Acting as a witch causes your body to undergo a complete transformation, turning you into a woman. Hiss. Lumian took a deep breath, relieved that his first obtained characteristic was that of a hunter. Had he obtained something related to the assassin pathway, he might very well have been lost to it due to his eagerness. What happened to the man who was considering it? Did he drink it? Lumian asked, unable to resist. Aurora replied with a smile. He agonized over it for a long time. He didn't want to become a woman, but he also didn't want to stay at sequence 8. Eventually, someone persuaded him. Life is short, why not give it a try? After that, I met him again at a gathering. No, he was already a her by then. She was already a woman by then. A beautiful and charming one at that. Lumian was momentarily speechless. Aurora grinned at him and added, clearly enjoying herself. In the future, should you reach sequence 5 and find yourself unable to obtain the sequence 4 materials for the hunter pathway, you might consider the demoness pathway instead. The assassin pathway is also known as the demoness pathway. Demoness. Lumian found the name assassin bewildering. The mysticism world was fraught with dangers. He deftly steered the conversation back on track. So Madame Pualis is truly Pilit the Casanova. Even an assassin could transform into a demoness. A path that enabled a man to bear children was likely to transform a man into a woman. Aurora nodded warily and gazed out of the window. I suspect that Madame Pualis transitioned to a woman only after reaching a specific sequence. She had to disappear to avoid discovery by the authorities. According to the mysterious lady, the power of a deity's boon can also be divided into sequences. Her abnormal pathway would also include the ability to promote fertility, manipulate life, and control the undead. Aurora deduced that she could manipulate life and control the undead from Lumian's battle with the midwife. That was the same performance Madame Knight, who looked like Madame Pualis, had showcased in Permitha with the undead chasing after her. Aurora suddenly exclaimed, "What's the matter?" Lumian asked cautiously, "Did his sister uncover another ominous truth?" Aurora scowled at her brother and replied, "At the afternoon tea, Madame Pualis said that love is unfathomable. She wished he would perish for his mistake, but when he faced death, she saved him and refused to tell the other party. I didn't comprehend it then, and I didn't dwell on it. Now, I wonder if she had an ulterior motive for saying that." Lumian was equally puzzled. She saved someone? When did she do that? Suddenly he halted and stared at Aurora. The siblings remembered that Madame Knight had saved them by distracting the undead in Permitha. But that was from the preceding cycle. Lumian was about to reject it, but he couldn't. He and Aurora exchanged a look and realized their eyes were filled with shock and dread. If Madame Pualis was referring to that incident, it meant she retained some of her memories from the loop. "It's impossible," Aurora muttered to herself. "Never mind. Let's assume it's true. I'd rather overestimate our foe than underestimate them." Lumian concurred. Then he had a thought. "Aurora, grande sir, considering that Madame Pualis might have been a man, did she fall in love with you? I didn't do anything wrong. You were the one who spied on Louis Lund giving birth. Pualis is infatuated with you," Aurora riposted. Lumian muttered under his breath. "Perhaps she believes that you instigated me. I don't usually associate with her, but I did once bring some people to see her having an affair with the padre. She teased me for it. You, on the other hand, discuss literature and trends with her occasionally. You even go to her house to borrow a pony." "Huh." Aurora's voice rose in disgust. "Then why was she trying to set me up with those awful men you told me about?" Lumian paused before responding. Maybe she's trying to discourage your interest in men and lead you to her instead. What kind of strange things have you been reading? Aurora glared at her brother. Not only could Lumian provide a rational answer, but he did it with forceful verve. Your novels. You wrote something similar in one of them. Is that so? Aurora fell into deep thought. After a moment, she looked out the window and said, It's been a while, but Madame Pualis hasn't come after us. The cycle hasn't started again. Perhaps she doesn't want to kill the foreigners. If an investigator sent by the officials were to be killed, it would cause even greater trouble, Lumian speculated. And she doesn't suspect me, so she doesn't suspect you either. The witness was dead, and no one else had seen him. Aurora nodded and said self-deprecatingly, I don't even feel like eating dinner. Suddenly Lumian had an idea. What if we go to the castle? Is the perpetrator returning to the scene of the crime? Aurora laughed. Lumian nodded. I want to investigate the castle. Madame Pualis doesn't suspect me, so I can go unnoticed. Oh, and I haven't picked any tulips yet. I can ask for a few under the guise of making fragrances. Since Aurora and Madame Pualis appeared to be friends, there was no issue with Lumian's actions. Aurora thought for a moment before saying, We can try, but we can't be sure that Madame Pualis won't cause trouble. Yes, if you don't return in half an hour, I'll go to the edge of the village and trigger the cycle to start again. All right, Lumian agreed. As Lumian arrived at the administrator's castle once again, the sun had already set behind the mountain, painting the horizon with a red hue. Passing through the garden, Lumian reached the open main entrance and approached a male servant. Excuse me, my Grande Sœur Aurora is creating a fragrance. Could I please borrow some tulips from Madame Pualis? The male servant, dressed in a red shirt and white pants, responded without any hint of suspicion. I'll inquire with Madame. He quickly disappeared into the castle. Shortly after he reappeared. Madame says you may go straight to the garden to pluck them. She really doesn't suspect me? Besides, it's as if nothing happened. Nevertheless, he refrained from entering the castle and headed towards the garden to search for the tulips. It was there that Lumian spotted the flowers and a lady's maid pruning a flowering tree in the shadows. As he casually sized her up, his gaze suddenly froze. The lady's maid was in her 40s, with brown hair, brown eyes, and a pretty face devoid of wrinkles. She was none other than the midwife who had fought Valentine and the others, and was eventually killed by Ryan. Yet here she stood, seemingly unscathed, her face shrouded in a shadow cast by the flowers and trees. The instant he laid eyes on the midwife, Lumian's heart seemed to cease beating. She's still alive? I clearly saw her killed by Ryan, and her spirit was destroyed. Lumian remembered vividly how the midwife had eventually been reduced to tiny pieces of flesh scattered on the ground. Some parts couldn't even be found. This must be a freaking ghost encounter. No, wait, there's the sound of breathing. Lumian thought of some scenes from his sister's novels, and his heart went from stillness to rapid beating. If it weren't for the midwife not looking at him, preoccupied with trimming the branches of the flowering tree, he would have reacted to the stress. Kacha. Tiny tree branches that grew haphazardly fell to the ground, snapping the stunned Lumian out of his daze. He subconsciously took a step forward, walking towards the place where the tulips bloomed. The midwife didn't stop him or even turn around. Lumian couldn't help but steal another glance at her. She was focused on pruning the branches. The shadows cast by the flowers and trees made her profile look dark and gloomy. Not daring to linger, Lumian plucked a few tulips and left the administrator's castle. His heart was still pounding even when he returned to the village. After calming himself down, Lumian walked towards Raymond Gregg's house. It was still too early for Aurora to trigger the cycle. It was also a two-story building, but compared to Lumian and Aurora's house, it was clearly older, more dilapidated and narrower. The outer wall revealed the gray color of stone amidst the many green plants creeping over it. At that moment, the Gregg's door was wide open, allowing one to see the stove on the left, the table on the right, and the wooden buckets behind. Lumian recalled that the wooden barrels were used for storage. There were two simple wooden beds in the space they isolated. They belonged to Raymond and his sister. Lumian didn't knock, and walked straight into the Gregg's house as usual. Raymond's elder and younger sisters were helping their mother prepare dinner. Raymond's father, Pierre Greg, was sitting on a chair at the wooden table, drinking cheap wine with a gloomy expression. "I heard that Raymond is missing?" Lumian asked Pierre Greg with a concerned look. Pierre Greg seemed to have aged significantly, and the few wrinkles on his face were even more pronounced. He looked up at Lumian and asked in confusion and surprise, "You don't know?" At this moment, Raymond's mother and two sisters stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Lumian. Lumian couldn't be any more honest. "I've been busy with my own matters. I haven't seen Raymond for days." Pierre Greg had already inquired, and knew that Lumian was telling the truth. Otherwise, suspecting that this rascal had instigated Raymond to run away from home, he would have gone questioning him that afternoon. 2 afternoons ago, they said it was the 29th. Raymond didn't return after he left, Pierre Greg said with a gloomy expression. "We've been looking for him. His 2 brothers are still out searching. Where do you think he'd have gone?" Lumian hesitated before responding. He usually says that he doesn't want to learn shepherding, but he doesn't have much money on him. It's impossible for him to leave on his own. "Let me see if he left anything behind." As he spoke, he walked naturally to the wooden barrels at the back of the first floor, and passed through them to reach Raymond's bed. The bed was very simple, as if pieced together with a few planks of wood. However, the grayish-blue bedsheets, the pillow stuffed with straw, and the quilt with traces of mending were all clean. It was evident that they were often washed. This was because Aurora loved cleanliness and didn't allow lice to appear at home or on her body. Even Lumian had developed this habit. Therefore, when he interacted with his playmates, he would consciously urge them to maintain personal hygiene. He didn't allow those fellows to be dirty and live with lice and fleas all day. If Raymond and the others slacked off at some point and were discovered by him to have lice, they would definitely be pranked. They might even be pushed into the river and made to wash up even if they refused to. After a few years of oppression, Raymond habitually helped clean up the environment when he returned home. "We didn't find any message," Pierre Greg said with a worried expression as he followed him to the bed. Lumian sat by Raymond's bed and reached under the pillow. He found 2 items, a cracked dark red fountain pen and an exercise book filled with handwriting. Raymond was hungry for knowledge, but had little chance to receive an education. In Emperor Rosel's time, villages like Cordoue had mandatory township schools, housed in the same building as the administrator's office. The building also contained an army recruitment center, a recruit physical examination committee, and other institutions, but ultimately, there were only a few staff members. In recent decades, many villages had lost their schools. The church provided Sunday school for larger populations, but Cordoue had to rely on educated elders to teach the children sporadically. Over time, some young people became illiterate again. When Lumian was in a good mood, he would claim he needed money for drinks. So he sold his old fountain pens and workbooks to Raymond, Ava, and others at a low price, teaching them some words in the process. Raymond took every lesson as seriously as he did combat training and helping shepherds make cheese in the mountains to earn money. He was determined to change his fate. Lumian removed the fountain pen and exercise book, staring at them for a long time. I asked the padre. He said these are just simple words that don't form a sentence. Pierre Greg sighed. Lumian flipped through the exercise book, noting how the handwriting had improved from messy and ugly to something acceptable. "True, there's no message," he agreed with Pierre Greg before adding. "But I wonder if it's a code that can be deciphered into a sentence." "You've heard a similar story, right?" Aurora told it to many village children. "Did they mention it at home?" This included Raymond's younger brother and sister. "Yes, they did." Pierre Greg nodded. Cordoue villagers would often gather in the kitchen at night for conversation, laughter, and storytelling when they couldn't afford the tavern. First-time guests had to follow into social norms and bring a bottle of wine, even a cheap one. Pierre Greg had heard a similar story from his youngest son during such a gathering. Lumian held up the exercise book confidently. "I'll take it back to Aurora for her to examine and see if she can find anything." "All right." Pierre Greg didn't think it was anything valuable. After leaving the area surrounded by wooden barrels, Lumian walked toward the door, and Pierre Greg sat down again. A few steps later, Lumion heard Pierre Greg sigh and mutter, "If he didn't want to learn shepherding, he could have told me. Why did he just leave? Our family will soon be wealthy. He won't need to learn shepherding anymore." Wealthy? Lumion's heart raced as he turned around, feigning curiosity. What's this chance for wealth? Pierre Greg didn't look up, keeping his head lowered as he said despondently, "Our family's horoscope is about to change. Our luck will improve." What? Lumion felt a chill down his spine. "Who told you this?" he asked. Pierre Greg didn't answer, continuing to lament. Upon returning home, Lumion immediately informed his sister that the midwife was still alive. Aurora frowned her blonde brows. "She's not necessarily a living person." "Huh?" Lumion was taken aback. Aurora pondered and said, "Didn't we discuss this before? Madame Puali's pathway might have the power to control the undead. That might be a zombie." "Impossible," Lumion said. "I saw her without activating my spirit vision. Besides, there were no signs of stitching on her body. Back then, she was diced into many small pieces by Ryan." Lumion recalled and said, "Also, I heard her breathing." At this point Lumion paused. However, she was indeed a little sluggish. Her expression was gloomy, and her eyes weren't lively enough. She looked almost exactly like Naroka, the one I saw on the night of the previous loop when Naroka took the initiative to enter Permitha. Naroka, whose face was pale and eyes were blank. Of course, the midwife obviously resembled a living person more. Aurora nodded and said, "A special state that's closer to the undead." Unable to deduce an answer, she gestured for Lumion to say something else. Lumion recounted everything that had happened in Raimon's father's words in detail, as if nothing had happened in the castle. Aurora listened quietly and nodded. "Madame Pualis doesn't seem to want to pursue the matter of the castle. I wonder what she's holding back. Also, your discovery proves that a portion of the abnormality in the village is related to her. But she doesn't seem to be involved in the cycle." What she meant was that Madame Pualis's involvement in the abnormality was mainly the fertility, death, soul, and Permitha. Nothing to do with the time loop. "I think so too." Lumion had such an inkling during his explorations. "It seems that the person behind the Padre and company is most likely not Madame Pualis." Referring to Raimon's father's words, he guessed. "The one who spread the news that doing something can affect the horoscope and obtain good luck." Aurora acknowledged tersely, "We'll investigate tomorrow, and see if we can channel Raimon's spirit tonight." After dinner, Aurora saw that it was about time, and began to set up the altar. She was praying to herself, so she only placed a single candle, but the candle was replaced by another one made of slumber flowers and other materials. Aurora sanctified a silver dagger, and created a wall of spirituality. Then, she dripped the extract made of night vanilla and moon flowers onto the orange flames, stirring up a misty fog. Seeing that the preparations were complete, Aurora glanced at the workbook on the altar, and took a step back. She said in ancient Hermes, "I." As she uttered the word, her eyes darkened, as if an invisible wind was swirling around her. "I summon in my name." This was the second sentence she said, and she changed it to Hermes. As she didn't know where Raimon's spirit was, she couldn't directly communicate with it. She could only try summoning it. As a wild beyonder, she didn't dare pray to the Evernight goddess, who was in charge of this domain. She could only rely on herself. The chances of success weren't high, unless Raimon's spirit was indeed somewhere in Cordu, and was very close. Aurora continued to recite, "The spirit lingering in Cordu village." The man named Raimon Gregg, the owner of this exercise book. The orange candle flame suddenly swayed, absorbing the surrounding fog, and becoming slightly larger. Its light rippled, and was dyed with a deep blue color. Beads of sweat appeared on Aurora's forehead, as she began to borrow strength from various materials. Amidst the howling wind, a figure appeared above the blue flames. Having already activated his spirit vision, Lumion saw a translucent figure. He had brown hair and eyes, looking rather ordinary. It was Raimon Gregg. He was indeed still in the village. Raimon's body was bloated, his face pale, and blood-colored tears were dripping from the corners of his eyes. Aurora was clearly stunned. After the cycle was restarted, Raimon had only gone missing and hadn't drowned. How did his spirit end up like this? That's right. If he hadn't drowned, how could he have become a spirit? They were self-contradictory. Amidst her confusion, Aurora asked, Raymond Gregg, why did you disappear? Raymond's expression suddenly turned ferocious as he shouted sharply, They drowned me. They. Lumion couldn't hide his surprise at Raymond's response. He had assumed that Raymond had drowned in the river of his own accord, becoming a sacrifice to some unknown entity. But now it seemed there were others involved. It wasn't just an unseen force that had pulled Raymond into the depths. Who are they? Aurora demanded. Raymond's face contorted with pain and fury. His eyes burned with hatred. He spat the words, Pons Benet and his men. They held me down in the water. After Ava and the others had left the riverbank, Pons Benet and his thugs appeared where Raymond had washed ashore. They forced him back into the water, drowning him to turn him into a sacrifice? Lumion pieced together the scenario from Raymond's words. The entire Lent celebration had been twisted into a dark, sacrificial ritual. Aurora pressed for more information, but Raymond only repeated the same few phrases, as if they were all that remained of his memory. Damn, we missed the best time for spirit channeling. All we have left is this lingering obsession. Aurora thought for a moment, formulating a question that Raymond might or might not recall. Did they sacrifice you to a specific being? What's so special about him? Where is he? This time, Aurora was more cautious. She didn't ask for the full name, only seeking indirect information to aid her judgment. She believed that if Raymond's spirit had sensed anything during the sacrifice, it would have left a strong impression. Otherwise it wouldn't. Raymond hesitated, tears welling up in his ghostly eyes, turning the corners red. Lumion's expression darkened. Unconsciously, he began clenching his fists. Suddenly Raymond cried out, Underground. Beneath the cathedral. What? Aurora could hardly believe her ears. Based on her question, Raymond was implying that the secret entity he had been sacrificed to resided beneath the cathedral. That's impossible. It's the fifth epoch. How can a god walk the land? Aurora composed herself, considering that Raymond's spirit retained only a fragment of his obsession and some spirituality. His answers were disjointed and fixated on certain points. In other words, his testimony might not actually confirm the being's location beneath the cathedral. It could simply be a reaction to her prompting. But regardless of whether Raymond's answer was true or a reflection of his obsession, something was amiss beneath the cathedral. It held the key to the sacrificial ritual. Aurora could only hope that the secrets hidden there wouldn't prove too horrifying or outlandish. She tried asking about other matters, but Raymond's spirit could only repeat phrases like, They drowned me, Pons Benet, and beneath the cathedral. Seeing no further gains, Aurora ended the spirit channeling and watched as Raymond's form vanished above the candle flame. The blue hue that had stained the altar swiftly receded. After dispelling the wall of spirituality, she noticed Lumion lost in thought, silent. What are you thinking about? Aurora waved her hand in front of her brother's eyes. The corners of Lumion's mouth curled up as he forced a smile. I regret not hitting Pons Benet harder yesterday. He had kneed Pons Benet, causing him considerable pain. But he had held back, not wanting to escalate the conflict with the Padre and his allies before the 12th night. He had rationally restrained himself, not crippling Pons Benet outright. There'll be a chance, Aurora reassured him. Lumion nodded and chuckled. Actually, we've been overlooking something. Before Lent, we're not the only ones afraid of escalating the conflict. The Padre and his goons are too. They're not ready, and they haven't started the ritual. In other words, if Lumion had truly wanted Pons Benet to suffer irreversible harm, the Padre would likely only feign retribution and avoid any real action. They would bide their time until Lent, regardless of whether Lumion had offended them or not. Once the Lent celebration began, everyone in the village would be in their sights. Aurora understood Lumion's point and nodded slightly. You can decide how to exact revenge on Pons Benet. What we need to focus on now is how we can survive until the 12th night after the Padre and his cronies gain immense power during Lent. Lumion immediately sank into deep contemplation. Aurora shared her thoughts. We have two options. We either join forces with the three foreigners, or we find a way to strengthen ourselves. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. If we can confirm that Madame Pualis has no connection to the loop, and is trapped here like us, we might even cooperate with her. Ha! Lumion was taken aback. Madame Pualis was a terrifying and malevolent beyonder. Aurora sighed and said, "A philosopher from my homeland once said that balance is needed between principal and secondary contradictions. We must unite all possible forces." Yes, there's definitely something off about the cathedral's underground. It might hold crucial clues. We have to investigate it before Lent, as we may not get another opportunity. From Aurora's knowledge, most of the cathedrals in this world had underground chambers. Some stored sealed artifacts, while others served as burial sites for important figures. Although Corda's cathedral didn't contain sealed artifacts or notable people to be buried, it still featured a large basement when constructed. All right, Lumion agreed. I'll talk to the 3 foreigners tomorrow. He then brought up Raimund's condition. Why can he only say those few words? Was the spirit not summoned properly? Aurora sighed again. There's a critical period for mediumship. Within an hour of death. After an hour, the spirit of the deceased rapidly dissipates, losing their original memories. All that remains are some thoughts, emotions, and images they can't let go. In the technical terms of our homeland, it's called obsession. Lumion nodded slightly. When the next cycle starts, we'll summon Raimund from the beginning. Does that count as an hour of death? But wait. Why does Raimund remember the last cycle? Only then did he recognize the issue. After the cycle reset, shouldn't Raimund forget about drowning? Aurora was stumped. Combining her thoughts from the ritual, she pondered and said, I believe it counts. It's not Lent yet. According to the timeline, Raimund hasn't drowned, so he shouldn't know the murderer's identity. However, because he lost his body, he can only exist as a spirit. It's similar to death. There will be lingering obsessions. Thus, the person we summon just now remembers certain events from the previous cycle. In simpler terms, Raimund's state has become unique due to his body's loss. He retains a certain amount of memories when the cycle resets. It's like a glitch. The loop created a tiny error, because Raimund's body was sacrificed? Lumion roughly understood his sister's explanation. Aurora chuckled and added, It seems that the power allowing us to loop is very mechanical and rigid. It probably isn't under the original owner's control, and operates autonomously. Otherwise, it could easily target Raimund's spirit. At this point, she appeared to relax somewhat. Haha. In that case, we still have a chance to break the cycle. Influenced by his sister's emotions, Lumion's somber mood lifted slightly. After all their efforts, they finally saw a glimmer of hope. The two of them cleaned up the altar and moved to the second-floor study. Aurora taught Lumion Hermes and Ancient Hermes, word by word, based on the disordered and incorrect ritual he had written. Lumion had already learned some words, so his progress was promising. Under the bright electric lamp, Aurora explained the pronunciation and structure of the words to her brother. While he revised, she used musk, cloves, blood, and other materials to create candles. As Lumion studied intently, he occasionally glanced at his sister working beside him, feeling as if he had returned to their warm life, free from loops or malevolent gods. Outside the window, the night was tranquil. Lumion woke up to find himself in his misty room. As he got out of bed, he walked over to the table and grabbed a pen and paper. He then wrote down the Ancient Hermes and Hermes words, but in the wrong order. He then corrected them by labeling each with a number. After finishing, Lumion let out a sigh of relief and looked over to the table. There were 4 items there. The 2 grayish-white musk candles made by Aurora, one with Lumion's blood, and the other without. The bottle of gray amber perfume, the metal bottle containing tulip powder, and the silver dagger provided by Aurora. That lady really sent them in. Lumion's heart calmed down when he saw the items. Lumion grabbed the items and looked for Aurora's homemade incense. When he found it, he went downstairs and placed everything on the dining table. Then, he went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and a pile of coarse salt. The materials for the ritual were now prepared. Before falling asleep, Aurora was worried that Lumion didn't have the corresponding symbol to pray for the boon. This would prevent him from burning the items on the replica goatskin to inform the target deity of his desires. However, Since the mysterious lady didn't mention it, there was probably no need for it. After all, it was essentially praying to the power in Lumien's body. It could hear all the prayers without any additional paperwork. Lumien took a deep breath and slowly exhaled as he looked at the items on the dining table. Without wasting a moment, Lumien placed one of the grayish-white musk candles, the one with his own blood, at the top of the altar, representing the deity. He placed the other candle in front of him, following the order of God before man. Lumien lit the candle by sparking his spirituality. He wasn't an expert at sanctifying the ritual's silver dagger, or creating a wall of spirituality. As Lumien's spirituality flowed out from the tip of the silver dagger and connected with the air around him, he felt a mystical sensation that he couldn't explain. Soon, the wall of spirituality was complete, and Lumien's own spirituality was significantly depleted. He cleared his mind using Aurora's homemade incense and cogitation, allowing him to enter a state where he could perform the ritualistic magic. With a sizzling sound, Lumien dripped the gray amber perfume and tulip powder onto the candle that represented the deity. A strange fragrance filled the air, and Lumien felt a magical energy pulsing around him. Lumien took a step back, glancing at the small notebook beside the altar. He looked at the burning candle and shouted in ancient Hermes, "Power of inevitability! Power of inevitability!" As Lumien uttered the words in ancient Hermes, the light above the altar dimmed ominously. The orange candle flame flickered wildly, as if buffeted by an unseen wind, compressing to the size of a peppercorn. Simultaneously, heat bloomed in his chest, and his head spun. His ears buzzed, as if once again on the verge of hearing that terrifying voice emanating from an infinite distance, yet remaining unnervingly close. Lumien steadied himself and had a sudden realization. The corruption within him had been sealed by the master of the bluish-black symbol. Even if he delved into deep cogitation, he could only summon the thorn symbol and release a meager aura. He couldn't harness its true power. Could this ritual bypass the seal and absorb the boon? Only if the owner of the bluish-black symbol, that great existence, had tacitly granted permission. Remembering the enigmatic lady's self-assured demeanor, Lumien felt a surge of confidence. He even suspected that the ritual itself contained a component for seeking the Great Presence's approval. As for which part, his knowledge of mysticism was too limited to speculate. In the throes of the ritual, Lumien dared not delay. With a focused mind, he began reciting the subsequent incantations in ancient Hermes. You are the past, the present, and the future. You are the cause, the effect, and the process. These words resonated within the sealed altar. The floor and artifacts seemed to writhe, as if innumerable bizarre entities were about to burst forth and invade the dream ruins. Oh! A black wind materialized out of nowhere, encircling Lumien. The candle flame, previously shrunk to a peppercorn size, swelled, suffused with a silvery hue and a touch of black. Lumien heard the voice that had always pushed him to the brink of death once more. But at some point, a faint gray fog had emerged from the altar, coalescing around him. The sensation left him suspended between deep cogitation and witnessing the Noodle Man's dance. He wasn't on the edge of death, but he wasn't comfortable either. It felt like severe tinnitus, dizzy, nauseous, and agitated to a degree, his mind a swirling mess. Barely maintaining control, Lumien continued the ritual. I implore you. I beseech your benediction. I plead with you to grant me the power of dancer. Tulip, a herb that belongs to inevitability. Please pass your powers to my incantation. Gray amber, herb that belongs to inevitability. Please pass your powers to my incantation. As the ritual progressed, Lumien's tinnitus and dizziness intensified. It felt as if countless maggots writhed beneath his skin. Finally, he completed the incantation. Almost instantaneously, the silver-black candle flame condensed, transforming into a pillar of light that illuminated his left pectoral. Silver-black phantom liquid poured forth, swiftly enveloping Lumien, rendering him sinister and fearsome. It felt as if his skin was pierced by 1,000 needles, his muscles and ligaments torn asunder. The mysterious voice became deafening, reverberating within his mind. Lumien was consumed by excruciating pain, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. His blood vessels seared as if incinerated from within. This torment far exceeded the near-death state induced by deep cogitation. All he could do was clench his teeth and endure, desperately clinging to his fraying sanity. As for everything else, it didn't matter. Amid the tempestuous onslaught, he was adrift. Time became an enigma. At last, the agonizing pain abated. Lumian felt as if he had been unburdened, or had emerged from drowning. A sudden sense of relief washing over him. He swiftly collected his thoughts and looked up. The candle flame had returned to its original size, but retained its silver and black hues. Regaining his senses, Lumian took 2 hasty steps forward, and snuffed out the candle representing him to avert any mishaps. Next was the candle symbolizing the deity. He meticulously followed the procedure, completing the ritual step by step. As he dissolved the wall of spirituality, he felt mentally drained and his body sore, as if he had battled a formidable beast. Before long, the dining table was cleared. Lumian began to assess his condition, and discovered a wealth of knowledge had materialized in his mind. There were 3 primary parts to this. First, it involved harnessing the power of dance, rhythm, and spirituality to tap into the forces of nature and communicate with unknown entities. This was the essence of being a dancer. With this knowledge, Lumian could not only beseech inevitability, but also craft new sacrificial dances tailored to various situations, in order to appease other beings. The second and third parts were applications of the first. What Lumian desired most was the enigmatic dance performed by Noodle Man. The knowledge was directly implanted into his mind, enabling him to comprehend it instantly. All that remained was to practice. With this arcane sacrificial dance, Lumian could activate the black thorn symbol on his chest while exploring the dream ruins, suppressing or weakening the formidable monsters therein. The third segment involved another bizarre dance. It didn't resemble a traditional sacrificial rite, but rather a blend of sacrifice and summoning. By executing this dance, Lumian could attract nearby objects, and at the cost of his own blood, bond one of them to himself, thereby gaining access to one of its abilities or traits. Of course, Lumian would first need to endure such possession. Some attachments could inflict significant adverse effects on humans, while others might prove reluctant to depart, creating complications. Lumian felt it was crucial to understand the summoned entities fully. It would be far too hazardous to experiment without anticipating potential issues. The value of mystical knowledge was apparent in such a situation. Lumian desperately required resources like Mysterious Creatures Illustrated or Spirit World Creatures Illustrated. But even a warlock, renowned for their extensive knowledge, could not possess such information. Moments later, Lumian stretched and discovered that his flexibility had indeed improved dramatically. Although not quite on par with Noodle Man, a mutated monster with reassembled organs, he now surpassed nearly all ordinary humans, enabling him to execute the enigmatic sacrificial dance. Lumian effortlessly kicked backward, touching the back of his head, and nodded contentedly, murmuring, "That's right. I can perform many actions that were once impossible. My hunter combat skills have also greatly improved." Lumian practiced the mysterious dance to familiarize his body with the corresponding movements, aiming to reduce the time needed to complete the routine. Sometimes his movements were forceful and resonant, as if in combat, while other times they were gentle and unhurried, as if conveying a message, yet always rhythmic. As Lumian danced, his spiritual energy radiated outward, merging with the ambient natural forces. Gradually, his thoughts concentrated, his mind quieted, and he entered a transcendent mystical state. This allowed him to perceive various subtle phenomena surrounding him, as if his spirit vision had been activated. Simultaneously, he seemed to connect with the unseen power within him. His chest warmed once more, and a faint horrifying voice echoed, but without consequence. Phew! Lumian ceased dancing, unfastened his clothing, and inspected his chest. The black thorn symbol re-emerged, accompanied by the bluish-black one. Lumian's thoughts briefly scattered, but quickly returned to normal. He had achieved the desired effect perfectly. He then calculated the precise duration from the emergence of the black thorn symbol to its disappearance. It lasted approximately 1 minute. Lumian fastened his clothes and prepared to try the other bizarre dance. It was crazy and warped, and he couldn't describe it properly. As he danced, his spirituality spread out again, blending with the natural forces surrounding him. In the last third of the dance, he sensed something strange approaching. 3 figures appeared on the first-floor window, but they were blurry and transparent. Lumian recognized them as the skinless monster, the shotgun monster, and the mouth orifice monster with the black mark. He muttered in amusement, "Is this a victim's complaints meeting?" Lumian could make one of the monsters attached to him and borrow their abilities by taking out a ritual silver dagger and making a cut on his body to release some blood. He craved the mouth orifice monster's invisibility but resisted the urge, lest something happen via allowing a monster he murdered to possess him, and finished the dance. As Lumian danced the last few moves, he heard weak and soft voices. It sounded like many people communicating, but it was unclear where the voices came from. Lumian analyzed it and realized the voices seemed to come from his body, from the corruption that had been sealed. After the last move, Lumian stood there and muttered to himself, "What did I hear?" Lumian was only semi-literate in the field of mysticism, and couldn't identify the source of the soft sounds he heard. He had no choice but to give up, as it wasn't more terrifying than the corruption itself. After the sounds subsided and him finishing the 2 mysterious dances, Lumian confirmed that the dancer had enhanced his spirituality. Although he knew he was most likely inferior to Sequence 9s who excelled in spirituality, he had escaped the shackles of being a hunter. He felt he was above average. "My shortcomings have been compensated for." Lumian was very happy about this. Lumian didn't dwell on what would happen to his body after enduring the dancer's power and the corresponding corruption. He couldn't stop it, so he decided not to think about it. He rubbed his tired head and made up his mind to rest for the night, returning to the real world to wait for the owl. Lumian's eyes snapped open, his aches gone and his spirituality restored. He sprang up, strode to the window, and yanked the curtains aside. Dawn had yet to break. The blood-red moon sank in the west while stars speckled the sky. On a nearby elm, the large owl with piercing eyes reappeared, gazing down at Lumian. Instead of alarm or anger, Lumian flashed a dazzling smile. "You're back," he said almost too eagerly. His mannerisms, his tone, even his facial expression, it all made the target want to punch him. The owl stared for a few seconds before spreading its wings and vanishing into the darkness. Almost simultaneously, Aurora emerged from her bedroom, turned the handle, and entered Lumian's room. "How'd it go?" Lumian asked immediately. Aurora nodded. "White paper is on it." Her once light blue eyes had darkened, and the trees in them grew larger as they receded. She produced a mercury-plated mirror and set it on Lumian's table. Using pale white powder, she cast a spell that showed him what she was seeing. Lumian glimpsed the owl's silhouette. It circled Cordu at a low altitude, as if trying to shake off any pursuers. But White Paper, a creature from the spirit world, was swift and unfazed, maintaining a constant distance. After a minute or two, the owl reached the village square. Without hesitation, it dove into the cemetery beside the cathedral. "Why is it here again?" Lumian sighed inwardly. The last time the siblings spied on Michel Garriga, the lizard that crawled from the deputy padre's mouth also wound up in the cemetery, slipping in and out of various graves. Lumian glanced at his sister. "You don't think it's like in stories, where the cemetery doubles as a villain's lair or hideout, do you?" Aurora scoffed. "You know life inspires art, right?" "I suppose." Lumian conceded, accepting the professional author's explanation. At that moment, the owl landed on an unremarkable grave. Like most graves in Intis, it featured a deep pit filled with a coffin and covered with soil. 1 or 2 stone slabs lay atop it, and a tombstone marked its head. This was Lumian's guess at least. From the outside, the grave seemed ordinary. The owl settled on the slabs sealing the grave. With White Paper's aid, Aurora and Lumian uncovered suspicious traces. The tombstone was blank. The stone slab, which should have been dirty and overgrown, was clean, as if regularly tended. "Something's off about this grave," Aurora remarked. As she spoke, the slab sealing the grave fell. No, not fell, opened. Inward like a door, revealing darkness and stone stairs descending deeper. Wow, Lumion marveled. It's huge. Not the average grave he'd pictured, but more like a spacious mausoleum. Cordu has such a place. Aurora had thought 6 years in town taught her everything about Cordu, but it was growing stranger by the day. As the siblings talked, the owl swooped into the depths of the mausoleum. The underground space was no exaggeration. As white paper followed, it entered a tomb chamber. About the size of Lumion's kitchen, the chamber held a black coffin at its center. The coffin wasn't closed. The lid leaned against the side, resting on the ground. The owl flew over and perched on the coffin's edge. The dead warlock. Lumion tensed. Aurora tersely agreed, and instructed white paper to approach the coffin and peer inside. Almost simultaneously, Lumion spotted a figure lurking in a corner of the tomb. Before he could tell his sister to check it out, white paper's gaze fell into the open coffin. With a bang, the mercury mirror before them shattered, and Aurora let out a pained, muffled cry. Lumion spun to face his sister, only to find her eyes squeezed shut. Blood-streaked tears traced her cheeks, and her facial muscles spasmed as if they might split. Without waiting for the semi-illiterate mysticism student to react, Aurora retrieved a short incense stick from a hidden pocket and lit it with a match. A subtle scent wafted distant and faint, soothing the body and mind. Aurora's facial distortion eased. Finally, she exhaled and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. "Are you okay?" Lumion asked, concerned. Aurora's eyes remained closed. "It's not serious. I'll recover after some sleep. Luckily, white paper is weak. Sometimes weakness is an advantage." She rejoiced. "Huh." Lumion didn't understand. Aurora laughed at herself. "In short, I saw something I shouldn't have, but white paper was too weak to handle it. It caught only a fleeting glimpse before suffering severe injuries that forced it to retreat into the spirit world. The impact on me lessened significantly as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to keep things under control. It could have been quite problematic. The world of mysticism is perilous." Lumion truly grasped the meaning of not seeing what one shouldn't. He waited for his sister to recover slightly before asking, "What did white paper see? Why was it so harmful?" "I saw a silver-black speck of light." Aurora didn't dare to remember. As for things that can cause damage just by looking at them, there are countless possibilities. Perhaps it's an object that reveals godhood, or a high-sequence Beyonder's mythical creature form, or something laden with curses and malice. Mythical creature form? Lumion had never encountered this term before. Aurora casually elucidated. The essence of the divine pathway is to transform Beyonders into deities. At Sequence 4, we can assume our own mythical creature form, albeit incomplete. For those below Sequence 4, merely witnessing this form can inflict harm. They might even lose control. Saints are that formidable. They're worlds apart from Beyonders below Sequence 4. No wonder they're deemed demigods at Sequence 4. Lumion instantly recognized his own ignorance. He had naively believed that the demigod title was basically no different from lower-ranked Beyonders. He then said, "Aurora, when white paper neared the coffin, I think I saw a figure in a corner of the tomb, but I couldn't make out who it was, what they looked like, or what they wore. Another person was there." Aurora was taken aback. Lumion nodded. "So, is the one inside the coffin the deceased warlock, or the one in the corner?" "I think it's the one in the coffin." Aurora, eyes still closed, pondered before continuing. "The one in the corner is either his puppet or subordinate, or another Beyonder. They control the warlock's corpse." Lumion tersely acknowledged her words. "This means the warlock issue hasn't been fully resolved. Perhaps this is the root cause slowly corrupting Cordu." This discovery left him both elated and frustrated. He was pleased that their investigation had advanced significantly, but disheartened that merely glimpsing the warlock's corpse could injure them. Losing control was a high probability. How could they return to the tomb for further confirmation and pursue additional actions? Aurora also considered this. "Let's not visit the tomb for now. We'll concentrate on the area beneath the cathedral. Maybe we can uncover vital clues there to help us resolve the tomb situation." All right. Lumion had previously planned to discuss exploring the cathedral's underground with the 3 foreigners at dawn. In response, Aurora added, "If I fully recover, I'll accompany you to the cathedral. Lumion hesitated for 2 seconds before consenting. At this point, they needed to marshal all their strength to find hope. With her eyes still closed, Aurora asked, "Your ritual appears to have succeeded. How do you feel?" Lumion recounted the entire ritual process and his gains, but omitted the precise description of the being. "I nearly lost control when I received the boon. It stabilized afterward, and my body underwent no abnormal changes. Perhaps it's because my sequence is low enough." Aurora smiled, eyes still closed. The dance that summons abnormal creatures around and allows one to be possessed by them is quite intriguing. It reminds me of a legendary ability from our homeland, the spiritual boxer. Huh. Lumion couldn't comprehend. Aurora laughed and replied, "It entails requesting partial possession from demigod-level creatures to utilize their combat prowess. That would require an incredibly robust body, soul, and mind, right?" Lumion speculated. Aurora didn't pursue the topic further, and instructed her brother, "Help me back to my room. I need to rest." As Lumion assisted his sister, and they walked to her bedroom, he casually inquired, "What I find odd about that ritual is that I extracted a bit of power from the seal without the bluish-black symbol's owner's consent. Could it be that he has been watching me the entire time? That's impossible. How could he have that much free time?" Aurora mulled it over for a moment before responding, "You mentioned that the mysterious woman's description of the honorific name was vague and inaccurate to avoid drawing the attention of the corresponding being. Could it be that the black thorns and the bluish-black symbol have some sort of shared authority?" Lumion pondered aloud. Maybe they both have power in the fate domain. And when you use a vague honorific name, it could refer not only to the person with the black thorns, but also the owner of the bluish-black symbol. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't matter much, but because you have the corresponding symbols and power on the altar, they reacted to the stimulation, and the existence discovered your actions. And since you were guided by the mysterious lady, it was easy for you to obtain permission. So when you finish reciting all the honorific names and point to the corruption in your body, there won't be any obstacles in extracting some strength. The back door has already been opened. What an ingenious ritual design. It has to be an expert at exploiting bugs. "I see," Lumion said, finally understanding the situation. His sister needed rest, so Lumion couldn't learn new Hermes and ancient Hermes words. He could only revise what he had already learned. Around 10 o'clock, he left the house and headed straight to Old Tavern. He had 2 objectives. First, he wanted to see if the mysterious lady would appear after he became a dancer and provide him with some knowledge. Second, Leah and the other foreigners lived there. After yesterday's incident, they might not be out today. Upon entering Old Tavern, Lumion quickly scanned the room and was disappointed to find that the spot where the lady usually sat was vacant. With a slow exhale, he walked to the bar counter, intending to ask if the 3 foreigners were around. At this moment, the tavern owner, Maurice Benet, appeared to have just woken up and was clearly not in high spirits. He had a bulbous nose and was conversing with a customer at the bar. The customer seemed agitated, gesturing wildly and making muffled sounds, but he couldn't speak. "Mute." Lumion approached curiously and realized the customer wasn't one of the village mutes, but Jean Maury, Sybil Barry's husband. Sybil was the mistress of Padre Guillaume Benet, sister of Shepherd Pierre Barry, and a member of their small group. Jean Maury isn't mute. Lumion assessed the middle-aged man in confusion. His black hair was unkempt, and his stubble was uneven. His eyes were filled with anger and fear. Uncharacteristically agitated, he gestured urgently, trying to communicate something to the tavern owner. As Lumion thought, odd, he approached the bar counter and knocked on it with a smile. "Hey, what's going on? Maurice, did you sell fake alcohol to Jean? He looks so angry he can't speak. What's that got to do with me?" Maurice Benet quickly defended himself. He muted himself. Jean Maury paused and glanced at Lumion, reverting to his usual sullen demeanor. He then turned and left Old Tavern. After he disappeared through the door, Lumion lowered his voice and asked, "What's wrong with him?" Maurice Benet looked outside and whispered, "I heard he caught Sybil and the Padre in bed together last night, and it made him so mad he went mute. Today he's been telling everyone he sees." "Huh." He doesn't even have the guts to go to Darij to confront the Padre. What a coward. Serves him right. Lumion was baffled and shocked. If he remembered correctly, Jean Maury knew about his wife Sybil's prolonged affair with the Padre. He just didn't want her to be with another man. How could he be so angry that he went mute over something he was prepared for? Something was off. Moreover, in the previous cycle, there had been no instance of Jean Maury becoming mute from anger. Otherwise, Lumion would have known. In Cordu, this was headline news. It would have spread rapidly. Could it be that their investigations had caused a disturbance, making Jean Maury encounter something he wouldn't have otherwise? As Lumion speculated, he showed an excited expression. Is that so? Then I'll have to ask him properly. Maurice Binet wasn't surprised by his eagerness for gossip, thinking it was typical. He scolded jokingly, "Damned kid. Be decent and don't provoke that poor man. Besides, he's mute and can't write. How can he tell you what happened?" Lumion chuckled and said, "Can't he gesture?" He raised his hands and clenched his left fist, gently hitting his right palm. Throughout the Darij region, and even across southern Intis, this was a universal gesture for the act between a man and a woman. Maurice Binet cursed angrily. "I hope you've got some decency left, and don't play pranks on that poor man." "Don't worry. I just want to hear the story." Lumion waved his hand and dashed out of Old Tavern, searching for Jean Maury. However, Lumion didn't know where the man had gone, nor was he gesturing his story to other villagers. Lumion scoured Cordu, but found no trace of him. Finally, he arrived at Jean Maury's house. At the entrance, Sybil Barry, clad in a grayish-white dress, was sorting through spoiled potatoes. "What's the matter?" The woman looked up at Lumion. Like Pierre Barry, she had blue eyes, and her long black hair flowed softly down her back, unlike other married women who always wore their hair in a bun. Lumion answered frankly, "I'm looking for Jean Maury." With plump cheeks and gentle features, Sybil replied indifferently, "He's not home." "Then do you know where he went?" Lumion pressed. Sybil replied calmly, "We had an argument last night. He might have left Cordu and doesn't want to return for the time being." Lumion's brows twitched. He sensed that something bad had happened. Clearly, Jean Maury couldn't leave Cordu. That would trigger the cycle and cause a restart. As these thoughts raced through his mind, Lumion wore a mischievous grin. "Why did you guys quarrel? I heard that you and the Padre—" He didn't finish the sentence, but instead punched his right palm with his left fist. Sybil's face turned cold as she cursed in a low voice, "Get lost. Get out of my house." Lumion clicked his tongue and left Jean Maury's house. After walking for a distance, the smile on his face vanished. In truth, he didn't want to ask about Sybil's affair with the Padre. He had seen the Padre and Madame Pualis naked. What else was there to ask? But if he didn't ask, it didn't fit his persona in the eyes of the villagers. He had already visited them. If he didn't anger the mistress of the house, could he still live up to the name of prankster king of Cordu? Therefore, Lumion had no choice but to ask. Otherwise, he might be suspected. The persona of a character was sometimes useful, and sometimes troublesome. Judging by the Padre's actions and the information he had, Lumion suspected that Jean Maury hadn't become mute because of the affair, but had uncovered something else. It was highly likely that he had been poisoned and rendered mute. "I have to find him as soon as possible. If he goes around looking for people to complain to, he might just die like the previous one. No, he's already missing." The more Lumion thought about it, the more he felt that something had happened to Jean Maury. The villager who had snitched in Darij previously had fallen to his death for no reason. Just as Lumion was making his last effort to find Jean Maury, he encountered Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, who were hanging around in the village. They were still wearing their original clothes. "Good morning, my cabbages." Lumion greeted them with a smile. As soon as they approached, he immediately asked in a low voice, "Did anything happen yesterday?" Leah replied with a smile, "That madam doesn't seem to want to pursue the matter. She didn't appear." As expected, Lumion looked around and saw that there was no one nearby. Only then did he tell the three official investigators about his sister's deduction of the Madame Pualis pathway and her guess of Pulet's identity. Valentine's expression soured as he listened, while Leah was rather excited. Ryan recalled and said, "It's rare for a demonist to appear in Riston province. We don't know much about this, but the higher-ups should know very well. I'll send a telegram later and tell them about Madame Puali's. I'll only mention how Madame Puali's room has Pilot's photo, but the Roquefort family doesn't have Puali's. Seeing Lumien's puzzled expression, Ryan added, in Intis, Demonis-related matters often happen. So, my sister's pen pal is also an Intis? Lumien nodded and said, so far, Madame Puali's doesn't seem to have anything to do with the loop. Also, she seems to be aware of the loop. That might be why she didn't pursue our search of the castle. Is it possible that we can join forces with her to some extent? Valentine blurted out. How can I work with such an evil and filthy person, who's even more terrifying than a demon? Lumien didn't even look at him. He turned his gaze to Ryan and Leah. Seeing that they were somewhat hesitant, he tried to persuade them earnestly. A limited cooperation, only in the loop. When this damned loop is resolved, you can deal with her however you want. You can even tell her directly about this. I believe she can understand and accept it. Ryan thought for a few seconds, patted Valentine's shoulder, and said to Lumien, indeed, the most important thing now is to resolve this loop. However, we can't be sure of that Madame's attitude. We don't dare to visit her directly. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble you, or your sister to communicate with her, and inquire. All right, Lumien agreed. He planned to do it himself. He didn't want his sister to be alone with Madame Puali's, when he realized that she might harbor abnormal feelings for his sister. Valentine kept a poker face as he listened to their conversation. He neither agreed nor disagreed. Lumien peered around furtively once more. There are 3 more clues. He recounted Raimund's case, Jean Maury's situation, and the burial chamber where the owl had flown into. Leah was stunned. How did you get so many clues so quickly? She even suspected this guy or his sister were off. That was why there were red flags and clues everywhere. Who were the real investigators here? Why hadn't we caught on? Blame yourselves for not remembering the first 2 cycles. Lumien smirked, spreading his hands in mock innocence. Leah nodded, swallowing his explanation. Ryan mulled it over for a beat before uttering in a gravelly voice. Then we gotta investigate the cathedral catacombs, eh? Yeah, it's probably very dangerous down there. You should contact Madame Puali's first. If she's down to joining, we'll have a way higher chance of nailing this. Outside the administrator's residence, a building transformed from an old castle. Lumien strolled through the gardens and approached the front door. He said to the valet standing guard, I need a word with Madame Puali's. The valet, clad in a crimson shirt and ivory pants, sized him up warily and asked, What's this about? Is this brat here to make trouble? Lumien scoffed. That's not for you to know. Why would some servant care so much? Who do you think you are? How many kids have you popped out? The valet hesitated before deciding to pass the message to Madame Puali's and let her decide if she wanted to entertain this cheeky young man. Lumien loitered by the entrance for a few minutes. When the valet returned, Lumien said, Madame will see you in the small parlor. The small parlor was familiar to Lumien. The few times he had accompanied his sister here, he had been entertained in that very room. Without needing directions, Lumien made his way to the correct room. The valet trailed behind like an obedient dog. Lumien sprawled on the sofa in the parlor and helped himself to the black tea. Then Madame Puali's glided through the doorway. The lady was dressed to kill in an exquisite black corset dress, a matching shawl draped over her shoulders. She wore a slightly askew lady's round hat and a diamond necklace laced in gold. The outfit struck Lumien as familiar. He realized that Madame Puali's had worn this very ensemble when she came to seduce him. She did that on purpose, didn't she? Lumien thought with an icy smile. Good morning, Madame Puali's. Just as the greeting left his lips, Lumien suddenly noticed the figure beside Madame Puali's. It wasn't Kathy, the lady's maid, but the midwife who had met her demise at Ryan's hands just yesterday. The midwife wore a grayish-white dress. Her eyes were blank, her face expressionless. Her skin had a bluish tinge, identical to when Lumien had seen her corpse in the garden the previous evening. However, she wasn't carrying any gardening tools this time. Bringing the midwife instead of her maid? She did that on purpose too, didn't she? Lumien couldn't help the cynical thought. Madame Puali smiled. It should be noon by now. She settled into the armchair that signified the host, while the midwife stood to one side like an accessory. If you haven't eaten lunch, it's not noon yet, Lumian quipped. His heart raced underneath the retort. He suspected Madame Pualis had brought the midwife here to interrogate him about yesterday's events. If he didn't handle this well, and Leah's group didn't restart the cycle in time, Lumian suspected he might have to play daddy for a few minutes. Or longer. Madame Pualis glanced at him, her bright eyes sparkling with an inscrutable smile. Casually she asked, "What seems to be the trouble?" Lumian decided to cut to the chase. Solemnly he said, "Madam, you must have realized we're stuck in a time loop." As he spoke, he watched Madame Pualis's face closely, alert for any reaction. If she revealed surprise, shock or confusion, he would quickly add, "Just kidding." Then he would start with something odd and see how she responded. Only then would he consider telling her about the time loop. Of course, if Madame Pualis looked like she already knew and her secret was out, escape would be his top priority. The odds of escape were slim in that scenario. But how would he know if there was any hope without trying? Madame Pualis sized Lumian up for a few seconds, then smiled. "Looks like you found a boss too." She didn't seem surprised by the time loop concept, nor did she look puzzled. That was as good as admitting she knew what was going on. Boss. That was a favorite word in Aurora's books. Did she mean some higher power that granted boons? Lumian interpreted Madame Pualis's words. He believed she could retain memories across loops, only because she had a boss. Some kind of protection. Lumian smiled and pretended to sigh in relief. "Seems I won't need to explain much." "What are you getting at?" Pualis asked, still smiling. The midwife stood motionless beside her like a mannequin. Lumian had an excuse prepared and launched into it with enough charm to convince anyone. "People outside already know about Corda's abnormality. If we don't end this loop soon, this place will be wiped out. Everyone dies. We're in the same boat. Only by uniting can we avoid sinking. Only then do we have a chance of finding the key to escape this loop and return to normal life. Madam, time is running out. Let's work together." Madame Pualis listened with a faint smile, not interrupting Lumian's story. NOV/LB/JNN. At this she chuckled. "Who said we're in this together? What? Could she be the one wanting to sink the boat?" Lumian grew alarmed. Madame Pualis maintained her smile. "Why should I cooperate with you? I can leave here at a specific time." Lumian was stunned, but a glimmer of hope flickered. "Are you saying you have a way out of the time loop? You only need to do something at a precise time." Madame Pualis nodded and sipped her tea from fine porcelain. She said nothing else. The perks of a higher power's protection. Wait, this isn't the first cycle. Why is she still here? Could other cycles have restarted before that specific time? That explains why she didn't pursue us infiltrating the castle and killing the midwife. She fears the three Beyonders causing trouble and forcibly restarting the cycle. Lumian grasped things that had puzzled him. He suspected Madame Pualis was also waiting for the 12th night. Amid his thoughts, Lumian smiled. "I wonder if you can take Aurora and me out of this cycle." "What official investigators? I've never heard of them." Madame Pualis appraised him with amusement. "Why should I help you?" "Didn't you say that love?" Lumian stopped, unable to continue. He meant to mention Madame Pualis's words about love, hoping she might save him and Aurora out of kindness. But since Madame Pualis likely desired his sister, he couldn't say it. If Madame Pualis loved him, a shameless man like Lumian would have played the love card and offered to bear her child to get them out of this loop. Well, he would grit his teeth and give birth himself if it meant Madame Pualis evacuating him and Aurora from this cycle. Madame Pualis's expression shifted slightly. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Are you suggesting love is unfathomable? Saving her despite clearly wanting her dead for her mistake?" Lumian didn't answer. He could tell Madame Pualis referred to of she. Madame Pualis didn't expect a response. She sighed. "But what if it's irredeemable?" "Irredeemable?" Lumian's heart sank like plunging into an icy lake in early spring. Regaining his breath, he asked for confirmation. "You mean at that time, you can only take a few people? But that doesn't include me or Aurora." Madame Pualis nodded. "You can see it that way. Looks like I still have to rely on myself." Lumian sighed, forcing calm. The rise and crash of hope was unpleasant indeed. He thought for a moment, then smiled. Madam, the 3 foreigners and I will explore the cathedral's underground later. If anything happens, the cycle might restart ahead of time. We won't even make it to Lent, let alone the 12th night. Madame Pualis narrowed her eyes, chin raised. Are you threatening me? No, just a reminder. Lumian smiled sincerely, the picture of relaxed. Outwardly, he feared angering Madame Pualis and being confined here to give birth. The 3 investigators would restart the cycle if he didn't emerge 15 minutes later. Madame Pualis gazed into Lumian's eyes for a few seconds. Seeing no flinch or evasion, she suddenly smiled. You're truly interesting. It would be lovely if you and your sister became my lovers. Without waiting for a response, she turned to the midwife. You destroyed a heretic spellmaster, yet I didn't blame you. I'm merciful enough, but you still expect my help? Heretic spellmaster? Lumian filed away the term and said earnestly, this isn't about help. It's about doing what benefits everyone. Madame Pualis fell silent for a few seconds before smiling again. I won't explore the cathedral's underground with you, but for Aurora's sake and your courage, I'll provide some help if anything happens. Lumian was satisfied to negotiate this much. He stood and mimicked the gentlemanly posture from his sister's books. Pressing a hand to his chest, he bowed. I thank you, my lady. Madame Pualis chuckled. Shouldn't it be my sunshine? She referred to what Lumian had said in a previous loop. Madam, you are my sunshine. Lumian felt embarrassed, but had always been shameless. Pretending not to hear, he left the small parlor. After descending the hill from the castle and entering Cordu, Lumian spotted Leah, Ryan and Valentine waiting to greet him. How did it go? Leah asked with a smile. Lumian recounted his conversation with Madame Pualis, concluding, this is the best outcome we could hope for. That's right. We can still count on someone to help in our direst moment. Ryan nodded. Lumian asked, did you get a reply? Before visiting the castle, Ryan had reported Madame Pualis wasn't truly of the Roquefort family and Pulet's photo was in her room. Leah exhaled, answering for Ryan. Our superiors remind us to consider the possibility of Pulet becoming a woman through potion or power. As expected, Lumian tersely acknowledged. When do we explore the cathedral's underground? Ryan had already decided. In a deep voice he said now. Now. Lumian jumped in fright. Though eager to explore the cathedral's underground, not to this extent. A thought occurred. Can't we wait until nightfall? In the dead of night with only 2 or 3 servants left in the cathedral, wouldn't it be easy for beyonders like them to infiltrate? Ryan replied gently yet firmly, now is the ideal time. Think about it. If we realize there's no one in the cathedral at night, and it lacks protection, how could the Padre and company not realize the same? I suspect they'll send their strongest to guard it in shifts or set subtle traps. Once triggered, there'll be an alarm. And now it's nearly noon. All villagers have gone home, so no one will come pray at this hour. Furthermore, it's daytime, so the traps won't activate to prevent accidents. With the 2 padres and servants in the cathedral, it's easy for people to lower their guard. In short, their strongest will be home eating in peace. We only face the padre, deputy padre and 3 odd job workers. Lumian nodded, grasping it, and finished Ryan's thought. And before April 3rd, the padre is still an ordinary person without supernatural powers. Today was April 1st. Plus, though the deputy padre seems off, he's clearly not a core member of the padre's team. Same for the 3 odd job workers, Leah added with a smile. Can't 4 beyonders handle 5 ordinary people silently? Lumian hesitated before replying. But won't this make it impossible to reach the 12th night? This amounted to triggering an abnormality on the padre's side. History would change accordingly. You said it yourself. Compared to us, the padre and company will hold back until Lent to usher in the 12th night. As long as we don't kill him, finding someone entering the basement will make him pretend not to notice and accelerate gaining supernatural powers, Leah said smiling. Gaining power, he might hunt us with the others. But Cordu isn't small and we're not weak. We can hide and stall until Lent. Lumian accepted this reasoning. All right, let's do it now. He reminded them, but Aurora's eyes haven't fully healed. I'm afraid she can't help us. Before seeing Madame Pualis, Lumion had checked on Aurora. Her eyes might only recover by evening. It's fine. Madame Pualis backs us, doesn't she? Leah said half-jokingly, the bells above her head ringing. Lumion no longer objected and cautiously suggested, before the cathedral, let's walk around the village and confirm Shepherd Pierre Barry, and the dangerous ones are home. He wanted to avoid running into Pierre and the others, who had received a boon, upon entering the basement. Ryan nodded approval, agreeing. Discussing details, Valentine glanced coldly at Lumion. Do you need cleansing? Leah quickly explained on her companion's behalf. You went into the castle and spoke with Madame Pualis. You might have been corrupted again. No, I believe Madame Pualis won't do that this time. It's meaningless. Lumion felt certain. He had no choice but to feel certain. He dared not let Valentine purify him again. Compared to yesterday, he was already a dancer. Evil aura had seeped from the seal inside. Once purified by holy water, there would likely be huge trouble. According to Aurora's analysis, he needed full-body purification. Seeing Lumion having no issue with it, Valentine, just being kind, naturally said no more. Then, wandering Cordu, Lumion made his way home and told Aurora their plan. Aurora was vexed at the inability to join and help. She could only offer to wait in the village edge and restart the cycle if anything went wrong. This required little vision. It sufficed to vaguely see the road. Agreeing to have her restart before anyone came for her at 12:30, Lumion bid Aurora farewell and reconvened with Leah's group. By then, the three official Beyonders had confirmed where Shepherd Pierre Barry and the Padres' core members were. Making a half detour, they reached the cathedral's side along a small path, the door they had used to catch the Padre and Madame Pualis' affair in a previous cycle. Lumion readied to volunteer when Leah strode over, using a wire to fiddle with the lock and push open the dark wooden door. Seeing Lumion's surprise, she smiled. It's a necessary technique for investigation. Don't make it sound so noble. Lumion didn't voice his thoughts as Leah had already entered the cathedral. The small silver bells on her veil and boots didn't move or make a sound. Lumion tried interpreting this. It's very safe entering the cathedral. No danger. Leah glanced back. Please add limited to dealing with the cathedral's people. Did this mean danger in the basement remained unknown? Lumion roughly understood, gaining insight into divination. However, even improved by Dancer, he lacked divination. Ryan passed him, following Leah into the cathedral. Steps in, a servant approached. In a blink, Ryan rushed over, raised a hand and chopped the servant behind an ear. The servant crumpled soundlessly. Ryan caught and dragged him into the nearest room. Leah rushed over, taking a colorless liquid-filled bottle and pouring it down the servant's throat. What's this? Lumion asked, curious. Leah maintained her smile. A sedative. You're well prepared. Lumion sighed inwardly. Taking down the three odd job workers without alerting the Padre, Leah crept into the Padre's room through the shadows, silently turning the handle and cracking the wooden door. She saw Corda's mightiest man in a gold-threaded white robe, breathing slowly and deeply on a simple bed. Plates for lunch and silver cutlery were on a table by the door. Leah sized him up and leapt in, chopping the Padre behind his ear. Immediately, she poured most of the remaining sedative down Guillaume Benet's throat. That's it. Lumion stuck his head out from behind Leah. Wasn't this too easy? What else? What did you expect of an ordinary person? Leah asked, amused. Lumion tersely acknowledged, lifting the Padre's robe. What are you doing? Leah was shocked yet smiling. Lumion said without turning, checking his body. He wanted to see if the Padre had the black thorn symbol on his chest. Soon, the Padre Guillaume Benet's top half was exposed, revealing nothing but tufts of black hair. No black thorn symbol. No black mark of a special contract. Lumion nodded imperceptibly, muttering, looks like the symbol is received after accepting the boon. Or does it exist now, but only activates through cogitation? And how did I get mine? The 12th night? n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Thinking the Padre Guillaume Benet might lack the black thorn symbol now, Lumion couldn't help evil thoughts. If I kill him now, will it trigger the cycle? How would killing this man in advance impact later events? Considering the Padre's importance later, Lumion, still wanting to wait for the 12th night, convinced himself otherwise. Leaving the Padre's room, Ryan said to Lumion and Leah, "Can't find the deputy Padre." Lumion hesitated before understanding. Maybe he's home. He's not allowed to live in the cathedral, and no one brings him food. This demon's lackey is truly tyrannical, Valentine cursed, glancing at the Padre in the room. Without further ado, the quartet headed in the opposite direction for the altar. In a corner loomed a stone staircase, narrow and steep, allowing only one person to pass through. It ascended into the cathedral's roof before winding deeper underground. Leah took point. After taking a few flights of stairs to the bottom, the veil and the 4 small silver bells on her boots rang at the same time. Ding ding dang dang. The sound wasn't loud but echoed faintly in the small space. Sometimes urgent, sometimes soothing. What does this mean? Lumion struggled to interpret it based on his past encounters. Leah turned aside and grinned. It means there's a level of risk, but I can't determine how serious. The divination had worked for the castle. Lumion muttered to himself in surprise. Doesn't this mean it's even more dangerous underground? Not necessarily, Leah soothed. Perhaps it's just interference. Hadn't Madame Pualis been absent at the castle? At this point, it was impossible to back out over such a trivial hiccup. They descended the stairs one by one into the depths. Soon, the 4 saw an old brown wooden door in the basement. Leah pinched her glabella and activated her spirit vision before approaching the wooden door. Though Lumion hadn't mastered activating spirit vision, with the dancer's spirituality boost, it didn't take long for him to activate it. He saw everyone glowing red and healthy. When her companions were set, Leah opened the basement door. Amidst the creaking, Lumion caught a whiff of a familiar fragrance. Elegant and sweet. He instantly made the connection and hurriedly told Ryan and the others, "Smells like gray amber." This was the material used to revere the hidden entity called inevitability. Lumion had briefly informed Ryan and the others about the black thorn symbol on Guillaume Binet's chest. Inevitability in the hidden entity's honorific, gray amber, tulips, cloves, and deer musk for the corresponding domain. He claimed the source was the Padre, and it had nothing to do with him. Hearing this, Leah, Ryan, and Valentine immediately grew alert with guesses. The sacrificial site, Ryan muttered. As he spoke, all looked to the basement. With dim light trickling down the stairs, they could barely see inside. The space under the cathedral was bigger than Lumion's whole first floor. The floor was grayish-white stone slabs, and it looked pitch black due to the lack of light. In the middle stood a stone platform half a man's height. The top of the stone platform caved in slightly, as if hiding something, but nobody could see clearly. As Lumion pondered, he whispered, "This might be where the Padre and company pray to the evil entity for boons. They actually built the evil god's altar under the cathedral." Valentine was furious. Lumion suspected he would combust any second and turn to holy light to purify everything here. "Calm down," Ryan patted Valentine's shoulder. "Get ready to light the fire." He then gestured for Leah to scout. Leah kept her sweet smile and sniffed. That hidden entity with inevitability as an honorific name really likes fragrance. Sighing, she entered the basement, lips moving as if chanting. The 4 silver bells chimed again, sometimes intense, sometimes soothing. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Leah turned and said to Ryan and the others, "Nothing unusual around the entrance." Ryan, Lumion, and Valentine entered the basement through the old brown wooden door and came to where Leah had stopped. Leah kept moving forward. After a few steps, the silver bell on her veil and boots shook violently. Ding ding dang dang. The sound spread everywhere. Specks of dawn-like light immediately appeared around Ryan and condensed, forming silver full-body armor over him. Simultaneously, a pure broadsword of light appeared in Ryan's hand. Valentine spread his arms, letting golden illusory flames burn around him. One flame suddenly lengthened and widened, and Leah walked out of it. She returned to Lumion and the others from near the altar. How magical! Lumion marveled at Leah's act again. Compared to the Sun Pathway's abilities and Ryan's combat state, he could understand and imagine. Leah's various acts were even more bizarre and more magical. For example, Her ability to transfer his wound from his thigh to his calf edge yesterday blew his mind. Faced with the sudden alarm, Lumian responded the only way he could. He drew the iron-black axe and hid behind Ryan, whose body had grown much larger. In this, he sized up his surroundings, but found no abnormal changes. He had his spirit vision on after all. Of course, Lumian had found something. With the Golden Flame's help, he saw piles of human bones at the basement edge. Some were even covered in light sheepskin. Sacrificial offerings from before? The Padre and company have conducted cultist rituals here for at least half a year. But Aurora and I didn't notice at all. Lumian's thoughts raced as he again felt Cordu, where he'd lived nearly 5 years, was unfamiliar. At some point, this place had become abnormal. Perhaps it had been abnormal from the beginning. Ryan warily eyed the altar direction and asked, "Is everything all right?" Leah shook her head. "I don't feel any issues, just signs of danger." "Strange." Lumian's voice trailed off as he turned to Leah. He saw that the beautiful woman's face had turned translucent, and twisted maggots seemed to crawl below. She was even scarier and eviler than legendary evil spirits, making his scalp tingle and heart race wildly. This exceeded Lumian's imagination. He suspected he'd have nightmares for a long time. "Why your face?" he warned Leah, unable to contain his fear. Leah subconsciously touched her face with her right hand, and her expression changed. As for whether her expression changed, Lumian couldn't tell from the transparent and distorted maggots. Leah hurriedly looked at her hand back. The skin there had also turned translucent, and the flesh below seemed to have turned into strange maggots. "You're losing control." Valentine also noticed Leah's condition. Leah muttered, confused, "But my mental state is all right." Ryan tilted his head and reminded, "Make sure you're not hallucinating." Almost simultaneously, Lumian realized the tall warrior was rapidly shrinking. The silver armor over him and broadsword of light disintegrated. In a blink, Ryan turned into a short man only about 1.5 meters tall. His brown coat and light yellow strides were either too big or too long. "He's also mutating? Only Valentine and I are fine." Lumian's pupils dilated as he subconsciously looked at Valentine. "Ryan, you've shrunk." Valentine, already a pure light figure, warned his companion anxiously. Lumian, nearly blinded, hurriedly asked Leah, "Any changes for me?" Leah said with countless transparent maggots that seemed to want to crawl out, but couldn't leave the flesh, "You're very normal. But under such circumstances, normality might be the greatest abnormality." "I'm normal? Could the blackthorn symbol have protected me, causing the danger here to think I'm one of them?" Lumian suddenly guessed. At this, Ryan had finished checking his body. He said warily, "I'm not shrinking, but I've returned to my former self. I've even lost my superpowers." "Former self?" Lumian blurted. He vaguely thought of something. Ryan nodded. "Yes, I'm naturally short. As a man, this is a huge misfortune. So I chose warrior when selecting my potion. It could effectively change my height. I don't know if I'm lucky or not. The past 5 to 6 years had many Beyonder monsters and abnormalities related to the warrior pathway appear, allowing me to be less worried about the materials needed to advance." Hearing Ryan's words, Lumian roughly understood the anomaly's source. "You've returned to the past. As far as I know, the authority of that hidden existence is related to the past." With that, he mimicked the mysterious lady and deliberately paused a few seconds before adding another word. "It also involves the present and the future." Though now speaking Intis, he still had to be cautious. Leah reacted quickly and blurted, "Valentine and I have entered the future. Is this the state of one of our futures? And I'm the present?" Lumian asked, confirming Leah's guess. He then thought of the three-faced monster he had encountered in the dream ruins. The monster had only one head, but it bore 3 faces. One aged, one in its prime, one youthful. Lumian suspected this was another gift from the owner of the blackthorn symbol. Moreover, it was of a higher order, but the recipient couldn't withstand it or had met with an accident, turning into a 3-faced monster. Leah nodded gently. "Likely, but this change in state doesn't affect my mind. I don't feel like I'm about to lose control at all, nor do I feel like I'm immolating," Valentine added. Ryan pondered a moment and said, "Similarly, I didn't lose my memories. Perhaps there's only a little power left here that can't affect the mind, heart, and memories. But if we maintain this state for too long, I'm unsure if there will be any serious aftereffects. I'm fine. At most, I'll consume the potion again and advance again. As for you, there should be many possibilities in the future. But now, perhaps the future has been determined. One will lose control, and the other will transform into holy light. This is an inevitability, I understand. How frightening, Leah exclaimed with a smile. Luckily, we can restart the cycle, while also attempting to seek the present here. Seeing that there were no terrifying monsters attacking, Lumian suggested, shall we go out first and see if we can recover naturally? Besides, we might encounter a power that represents the present along the way. Ryan didn't object. We can give it a shot. He was now an ordinary person, and it would be dangerous for him to go any further. I'm afraid that another change in state will cause me to lose control, Leah said cautiously. It would definitely be good to encounter the present, but it would be troublesome to encounter the past. They didn't know what would happen if future was additionally stacked on them. Lumian took the initiative to say, let me scout the way. I still have a chance to change my state. He mainly wanted to see if his luck was good enough to encounter the present, or if the black thorn symbol on his chest protected him. Be careful, Ryan warned, and Leah nodded. NOVL, B /JNN. Valentine's gaze on Lumian grew less cold. He couldn't help but think, this lad has a very sacrificial spirit. Furthermore, he's a devout believer of the Lord. Once the cycle is lifted, let's see if there's a way to remove the hidden corruption on his body, and let him join our team. Seeing that Lumian was about to take a step forward, Valentine, who had regained his composure, suggested, let me see if I can rid myself of this state first. No one objected. Lumian was the same. This was because he was in the present. He didn't need to remove any negative state or undergo purification. In the next second, he realized he had miscalculated. Valentine didn't directly use holy water creation to purify Leah and Ryan. Instead, he used sun halo. A dark golden light flashed, and an invisible force spread in all directions. Lumian jumped in fright. It was too late to evade, so he could only brace for the invisible force to crash upon him. He instantly felt warmth, and valor flooded his body. It was as if the sun had at last arrived in winter when he lacked clothes. Other than that, he felt nothing peculiar. It was precisely the same as the experience in the castle yesterday afternoon. As a dancer, am I actually unscathed? Lumian couldn't help but swivel his head to glimpse the short Ryan and the terrifying Leah. He realized that there was no black fog or smoke billowing from them. Promptly after, Valentine, who was in the form of a figure of light, conjured holy water creation and let fall a few drops on Leah and Ryan. However, the two of them retained their transformed semblances with no signs of improvement. n/o/vel/b/jan.c/om. Purification and exorcism are futile? Lumian asked. He hoped to determine why it was possible and why not. Only then would he, who had already received a boon, know what to evade or feign that nothing had transpired when encountering something similar in the future. Ryan briefly explained to him, purification and exorcism aren't omnipotent. The correspondent power is in the category of evil. For instance, the aura of depravity and all undead. The last isn't necessarily evil, but it's incompatible with the real world. It needs to return to the spirit world, so it can still be purified and exorcised. Just like how our definition of an evil god is based on their style of acting, the power of an evil god isn't necessarily evil. Lumian roughly fathomed and thoughtfully asked, inevitabilities. Power doesn't belong to evil, nor does it signify depravity. So there is no way to purify or exorcise it. Yes, Valentine had already affirmed this through his previous attempt. From the looks of it, it's normal for me to be able to withstand the halo. But why can the holy water activate the black thorn symbol on my chest and permit me to hear the terrifying sound? This is because the corruption in the seal doesn't belong to me at the moment. It's incompatible with my body, rendering my body impure. Therefore, it needs to be purified. Lumian made a guess. He had wanted to use Shepherd Pierre Barry, who had already received a boon, as an example to ask if the mutation of the body was also in the category of evil and depravity. But the current situation was rather urgent, so he didn't have the luxury to discuss the topic. Lumian tried to walk to the basement door. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound in his ears. He could vaguely hear a voice that seemed to come from an infinite distance, but also seemed to be right before him. However, it wasn't clear enough and was very fuzzy. It only made his chest heat up slightly, and his mind enter a state of disorder. This was very similar to when he saw Noodle Man dancing. This made Lumian confirm that the black thorn symbol on his chest had been partially activated. He quickly pivoted around and gazed at Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, only to find that they didn't react abnormally. Lumian was immediately disheartened. He originally believed that the 2 symbols on his chest could suppress and weaken Beyonders to a certain extent, but from the looks of it, they could only target the monsters in the dream ruins, especially those that had been bestowed by the owner of the black thorn symbol. Of course, he wasn't sure if fully activating the symbol on his chest would affect the surrounding Beyonders. "Has my condition changed?" he asked Leah and the others. No, Leah and the others shook their heads in unison. Lumian nodded indistinctly and affirmed 2 things. The first was the black thorn symbol on his chest, or rather, the evil god corruption sealed in his body. It could indeed help him resist the abnormality in the basement. Secondly, luck was on his side. He was affected by the power of the present. After a few seconds, Lumian attempted to take a diagonal step forward. The slight heat in his chest did not weaken, maintaining its previous intensity. "Any changes this time?" he asked Ryan and the others again. Leah was the first to shake her head. "You're fine." Lumian exhaled and muttered inwardly. "With the protection of the black thorn symbol, I can move freely here. Shepherd Pierre Barry and company should be the same. Wait, the Padre hasn't received any blessings yet. There's no thorn symbol. How did he reach the altar unscathed?" With this in mind, Lumian grasped something as he turned his gaze to the ground. With the help of Valentine's light, he saw many messy footprints that ordinary humans couldn't see. Apart from a small number of them, which were everywhere, they followed a certain pattern and extended to the front of the altar. Lumian immediately overlapped with the nearest footprint, and the slight heat in his chest began to weaken. This meant that he had returned to the present. As expected, there's a safe route here that leads to the present. Lumian suddenly became very happy. This was because the 3 powerful Beyonders, Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, hadn't discovered it, and he, a mere hunter, had found it. This reminded him of something his sister Aurora had said: every pathway has its strengths. Before becoming a demigod, Sequence 9 of some paths might trump Sequence 5 of others in certain situations. Lumian had originally felt inferior and suppressed, useless before the powerful Beyonders these past 2 days of exploration. Now he'd regained a good amount of confidence. Finding faint traces in reality is a hunter's specialty. "Can you?" Of course. Lumian didn't forget that Aurora added. "But there are pathways good at everything." He gathered his thoughts, turned around, and commanded Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, "Take a step toward the altar at the same time." Ryan and the others were clearly puzzled. They couldn't just trust Lumian blindly without knowing why. Lumian could only explain. "Look closely at the ground. There are many footprints marking a safe path left behind by the Padres group." Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, lacking Lumian's abilities, could barely see a trace in the sun's dim light. They believed him. They knew that in Intis, many hunter pathway Beyonders had collaborated. Some sequences were skilled at detecting faint signs. Following Lumian's guidance, they trekked the secure route. Instantly, Lumian saw Ryan regain height, Valentine darken, and Leah's face normalize. They had returned to the present, no longer trapped in the past or future. Lumian easily rejoined the team on the safe route. He grinned and said, "No more slip-ups. There may be no coming back if anything else goes south." He was mimicking Ryan's tone, and felt it fit their current situation. Typically, his attitude would have had him mocking them. "Haha, are you blind? Can't you see any of the obvious signs? Another mistake and you're done for." Leah touched her face and breathed a sigh of relief. "We're with you." Lumian wasn't humble. He carefully picked out the footprints on the ground and crept up to the altar. It wasn't as straightforward as heading back, just now since it didn't matter if he took a wrong turn. But Ryan and the others couldn't. This time Leah's silver bells stayed silent. Only once all four had reached the altar did they start ringing, sometimes soothing, other times intense. It's dangerous, but we can find a way around it, Leah, experienced enough, explained. Ryan instantly nodded. Don't touch anything here for now. We'll just observe. Lumion had already set his sights above the altar. There was a depression at the bottom, as if hollowed out to hold something. Inside were grayish-white candles, a small bottle of clear liquid, and an unopened wooden box. But the most striking item was a black object, a long robe with a hood. In front, in the center of the circle, was a circular symbol made of thorns. Every part of it was twisted and pitch black, as if painted with some strange substance. It gave the feeling of slowly oozing. Seeing the symbol, Lumion felt dizzy and ringing in his ears. Ryan snorted, and a dawn-like light naturally emanated from him. This helped Leah and Valentine suppress the mental confusion. Don't stare at that symbol too long, Ryan said in a deep voice. Lumion quickly shifted his gaze aside. The dizziness and ringing in his ears lessened. That seems to be all for the altar. Lumion was about to suggest searching the area when he heard Leah ask Ryan, "Will your sunrise gleam activate the altar?" Huh. Lumion whipped his head around and unconsciously looked at the altar again. Ding ding ding. Leah's veil and silver boots rang harshly, an urgent warning. In the same breath, the black altar robe leaped up as if inhabited by an invisible being. Oh! A chill wind gusted. Lumion glimpsed transparent faces under the hood, ferocious, warped heads radiating hatred. They swarmed into a strange, terrifying gestalt. Lumion recognized one face, pale, swollen, with blood and tears pooling in its eyes. Raymond. Lumion dodged behind Ryan, uninterested in a closer look. Save us! Save us! The translucent faces shrieked in unison. Their shrill cries pierced Ryan and the others like needles, threatening to fell them. Valentine was unmoved. Arms spread. He summoned a holy flame-wreathed pillar of light from the sky. It landed over the black robe. Light erupted. Lumion and Leah shut their eyes on instinct. Sensing the light dim, Lumion hurriedly opened his eyes. The black robe lay charred on the altar, resisting the golden flames licking at its edges. Yet still it struggled to stand, like a cursed puppet refusing to die. The translucent faces of Raymond and the others flickered in and out of existence around him. Ghosts trapped between the present and a future obliterated. Down! Ryan bellowed. Lumion dropped without hesitation. If there had been time, he would have thrown himself flat to the ground. Leah and Valentine were a heartbeat behind, scrambling to duck. In the same instant, Ryan plunged the sword of dawn into the altar's heart, piercing the robe. Silently the broadsword shattered into a resplendent storm of light, tearing the altar asunder. When the radiance cleared, Lumion peered up to find the altar a ruin, reduced by a third. Candles, thorns, and black cloth had vanished, ground to dust floating on the air. Incredible power. Lumion had pondered this strike since the day before. Everything okay? He asked. Leah rose and spun swiftly around. The 4 silver bells decorating her veil and boots jangled ominously, their tune neither reassuring nor alarming. This isn't over. She warned Ryan and Valentine before murmuring. The altar's gone, so what's the catch? As she spoke, Valentine conjured golden flames that floated in the air and lit up the space. At the far end of the basement, there was naught but piled human bones and a few sheepskins. The ceiling was bare and unadorned, not even a chandelier. Lumion snickered. No beyonder characteristics. Maybe they were sacrificed, Ryan said bluntly. It's also likely they didn't get many boons in the beginning and weren't tough enough. They could only nab normal folks as sacrifices and only go after beyonders once they had decent powers. For instance, this time, it was clear they weren't unfamiliar with getting boons. Ryan then said, "There's nothing else here. We should bail. No point tangling with danger we can't see." Lumion didn't react. Lumion scanned the room again, searching for any hidden doors from the subtle traces. The answer was no. He led the way out of the basement, Leah, Ryan, and Valentine trailing behind. As soon as Lumion emerged, Ryan grunted in pain. His body flew backward, slamming into the basement door. The rickety stairs shuddered. Wham! Some invisible spear had pierced Ryan's chest, pinning him to the wall. Blood gushed from the gaping wound. If Ryan hadn't jerked aside just in time, that spear would have skewered his heart. Leah, who had her spirit vision activated the entire time, couldn't detect their attacker. It was as if some deity had singled Ryan out for punishment. Before they could figure out what was going on, Leah's smile twisted into a grimace. Her arms snapped back on their own. Bones shattered with a crunch as her limbs went limp. A crater bloomed in her stomach, as if she'd been sucker-punched. The impact sent her staggering backwards into the wall. Valentine shrieked from the foot of the stairs. His ribs collapsed one by one, like a sledgehammer was pounding his chest. With a series of bangs, bloody holes tore through Leah and Valentine's stomach and chest, spearing them to the stone wall. Lumion was stunned for a moment. While this inexplicable change confused him, he was relieved that he didn't appear to be the target of this bizarre attack. Did that blackthorn symbol protect me? As this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly felt an invisible force slam him against the wall by the stairs. There was nothing visible with his spirit vision. Remembering what had happened to Ryan and the others, Lumion immediately dodged to the side. Intense agony instantly filled his mind. The skin on his right chest tore open, roughly exposing his lungs. Lumion felt as if an invisible rod had impaled him and nailed him to the wall. As his bright red blood flowed out, Ryan lit up the area with spots of light that looked like dawn. This would effectively banish evil and dispel illusions. However, the four of them still couldn't see anything. Bang! Ryan's chest caved in, hit by an invisible hammer. As Leah's veil and silver bell boots rang out intensely, her nails were pried out by an invisible force, staining them red. This indescribable pain contorted her face in terror. Valentine spread his arms and let the holy pillar of light descend upon him. The light of the sun suddenly erupted, obliterating all evil and igniting Valentine's body. However, in the sun's glare, his arms were uncontrollably wrenched backward and stuck to the wall. 2 blood-red holes appeared on his wrists, nailing them in place. When the light faded, Valentine's face was charred, and his skin peeled off inch by inch. Seeing their ordeal, Lumion couldn't help but feel anguish for them. It was unknown if it was because of the blackthorn symbol, but his misery had abetted. His face felt as if slapped by an invisible hand repeatedly. His face was red and swollen, and his teeth were loose. He could hardly speak. Just as another round of attacks were about to descend, Lumion's vision blurred, and he glimpsed a wilderness. In the distance loomed a mountain range, and close by stretched a grassy wilderness. 2 demon-like creatures with goat horns hauled a dark red, conch-like carriage from afar, hastening before Lumion and company. Seated in the carriage was a woman in emerald robes and laurel wreath. Chestnut locks swept up, hazel eyes bright and watery. Dignified and noble, reminiscent of Madame Puali's matured. She kept her pledge to proffer aid? Lumion startled, then delighted as the invisible force assailed them not. Somehow he knew the woman before him was not quite Madame Puali's. Or rather, not Madame Puali's precisely. More an unearthly construct Madame Puali's had fashioned by dint of will. Lumion chose to call her Madame Knight. Unlike his Permetha encounter, Madame Puali's grasped an oak branch mistletoe wreathed at its tip in one hand, a jadeite bowl of sparkling liquid in the other. Madame Puali's dipped the oak branch in the bowl and sprinkled them. After the third sprinkle, Lumion saw his chest wound heal apace. The swelling receded swiftly, and no more was he pinned immobile to the wall. Leah, Ryan and Valentine wholly healed, no trace of cruel injuries. What attacked us? Lumion asked, figuring nothing ventured, nothing lost. Madame Puali's, seated in the crimson carriage, replied superciliously, "There's a hint of sufferer taint on you now. Thankfully it's minor. Otherwise, you'd have to restart the loop." Sufferer taint? What's that supposed to mean? Lumion exchanged puzzled looks with Ryan and the others. Madame Puali's replied gently, "That's all I know." "Then do you know what happened to the dead warlock and owl in the cemetery?" Lumion pressed. Madame Puali's glanced at him. "If I'd known, things wouldn't have turned out this way. I'd originally planned to rule this place, but now I have no choice but to leave." Rule this place? Alarm bells rang in Lumion's head. Falling into a loop might not be the worst fate. NOVLB //JNN. Aurora and I have no idea how many babies we'd have if Madame Pualis gets her way. Compared to that, getting looped and destroyed at any moment doesn't seem so bad. At least we'd die unadulterated. Madame Pualis glanced at them, but said nothing more. She had her pitch-black demon beasts pull her conch carriage into the wilderness. By the time she disappeared from Lumion and the other's sight, the wilderness was gone. Just then, they realized they were still in the basement. Half of them were on the stairs, the other half by the wooden door. If not for the blood and fallen nails on the ground and walls, they'd have thought they'd experienced a hyper-realistic illusion. Let's get out of here first. Ryan quickly regained his senses and told Valentine. Get rid of any traces we left. Valentine nodded and conjured illusory golden flames to burn the blood and nails away. The four of them faced no further attacks on their way back to the cathedral. It was unclear if the sufferer taint had been expended, or if Madame Pualis had wiped it out. Just as Lumion was about to leave through the side door, he suddenly spotted the deputy padre, Michel Garriga, standing dazed outside the room where sleeping servants had been stowed. Was this fellow back from filling his stomach? Lumion was about to avoid him when Michel, with his curly brown hair and delicate features, suddenly turned and saw them. Ryan was poised to knock this guy out when Michel Garriga asked with an unnaturally cheerful smile, "Here to pray? Need a confession? Everyone else in the cathedral has collapsed. But you're concerned with confessions?" Lumion looked at Michel as if he were mad. Compared to before, this guy's abnormality was glaringly obvious. Leah sensed Michel's abnormality and turned to Ryan, asking with her eyes if she should knock him out. At this moment Lumion spoke up. "Is the padre not here?" Michel's eyes lit up, unable to hide his excitement. "The padre is resting. You can pray to me." His face was filled with pleading. Lumion hesitated, obviously uneasy, before reluctantly saying, "Fine." Seeing Michel's elated expression, Lumion turned to Leah and the others, feigning annoyance. "What's wrong with you lot? Coming to the cathedral to pray is what any true believer would do. What is there to be afraid of?" What he really meant was that they had already escaped the basement without getting caught. Why worry now? As believers of the eternal blazing sun, it was perfectly normal for them to come to the cathedral to pray. Using a side door was a trivial matter. As for the padre and his lackeys taking an extended lunch, what did that have to do with them? Lumion knew such excuses would only fool dimwits, but they should placate the padre, at least for now. The padre wouldn't expose them until Ryan's group tried reporting the irregularities to the higher-ups and put an end to Corda's depravities. As long as Leah and the others continued strolling around the village, casually chatting with people, as if they hadn't found anything incriminating in the cathedral's basement, the padre would be content to maintain the status quo. Add to that, Ryan had demolished their underground altar. It would take time for them to restore it. Lumion estimated the padre wouldn't gain any boons for at least a couple of days, if not until after Lent began. By then it wouldn't matter if the padre suspected them or not. Appearing normal was the most pressing concern. Upon hearing Lumion's words, Deputy Padre Michel Garriga vigorously nodded. "Absolutely. No matter your past sins, if you pray sincerely and repent, God will forgive you." "Is that so? What if the padre repented to the eternal blazing sun and confessed that I had strayed long ago, believing in an evil God? Now, I want to return to the righteous path." Lumion appeared pious as he strode to the altar, but he didn't buy it. Michel hastened ahead, seeming poised to take flight in his zeal. Leah couldn't help but glance sideways at Valentine, seeing his complicated expression at the fanatical clergyman. This should have earned Valentine's praise, but he knew the deputy padre was clearly deranged. Redirecting her gaze from Valentine, Leah rushed to Lumion's side and whispered in his ear, "Did you consider that half those present don't believe in the eternal blazing sun?" "You're not." Lumion seemed genuinely surprised. n/o/vel/b/jen.c//om. Not because he was perceptive and grasped her hint, but of the five there, aside from the unhinged deputy padre, Valentine was certainly one of the remaining four. Lumion himself barely counted as half. Leah nodded slightly, her bells chiming. She smiled and whispered, "Ryan hails from the machinery hive mind. I'm from Bureau 8, We don't belong to the Eternal Blazing Sun Church. Lumian had heard his sister mention that the machinery hive mind was on par with the Eternal Blazing Sun Church's Inquisition. It was a branch of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, dealing with matters concerning those from beyond. Bureau 8's full name was Bureau 8, under the Intis Intelligence and Homeland Security Committee. It was the Republic's most official organization in the domain of the Beyonders. Weren't you sent by the Church? Lumian asked curiously, finding a chair and sitting down. Leah sat beside him, smiling thinly. Too many dangerous run-ins with those from beyond have happened at country borders in recent years, especially in disputed territories. When Cordu called for help, the higher-ups decided to set up a joint task force to get into Cordu, figure out what's really going down, and give the best recommendation for how to handle it. Who knew that this place? She shook her head, seeming at a loss for words while her bells chimed. The strangeness and horror of this place was beyond her imagination. At times she felt Valentine was right to suggest reporting everything and requesting Cordu's destruction, but she wasn't ready to die yet. She had to choke back her professional instincts and morals. At that moment, Deputy Padre Michel Garriga picked up the book on the altar and glanced at the four praying. Leah then crossed her arms over her chest and bowed her head. Lumian was a little stunned. And you claim not to believe in the Eternal Blazing Sun. Leah sensed his gaze and turned, flashing him a wry grin. God won't fault me for posing as a sheep of another flock during a crusade. If you doubt it, look, she jerked her chin to the other side. Ryan, hailing from Machinery Hive Mind, folded his arms over his chest in a pious fashion. So your moral compass possesses flexibility when questing. Lumian longed to jibe Leah and Ryan, but worship had commenced. He couldn't lag behind. After adopting a reverent mien and closing his eyes, the deputy padre, Michel Garriga, riffled through the Holy Bible and intoned gravely, God spake, "Let there be light," and there was light. Lumian suddenly felt a surge of nostalgia as he listened to the familiar sermon in the cathedral. Though he used to just go with the flow and float through the service, whispering and gazing around, he now longed for the simplicity of the past. Even if he had to pray with the greatest devotion, even the unpleasant events that had once annoyed him were now a source of comfort. By the time Lumian and the others left the Eternal Blazing Sun Cathedral, the padre and servants were still knocked out cold. Ryan glanced toward the castle and sighed emotionally. That woman's far more powerful than I realized. How powerful? Lumian asked, curious. Ryan deliberated a moment. It's like she's touched the threshold of godhood, yet not quite. You seem to have said something, yet not quite. If Lumian didn't need Ryan and the others recently, he'd have spoken his mind. However, thanks to his extensive knowledge of mysticism, he could roughly guess what Ryan meant by the threshold of godhood. Sequence 4. The beginnings of a demigod. He pondered a moment. I think Puali seemed off when she appeared as Madam Knight. He'd told them about Madam Knight in Permitha. I got the same impression, Leah said with a smile. Like a botched patchwork monster. Ryan nodded. We have an understanding of Madam Knight to some extent. In the border region between Intis and Fainapotter, similar incidents have occurred frequently in recent years. Some call her Madam Knight, some call her Madam H.R.T., some call her the Benevolent, and some call her the Vile. But so far, we haven't caught any of them. We still lack a systematic grasp of them. Yes, this is the first time I've heard of Permitha. Leah strode to the edge of the village square with a tinkling gait. Something about Permitha occurred to me from the description. What? Lumian never felt embarrassed to inquire. Leah glanced southward. In Fainapotter's Church of Earth Mother, there's a saying, the soul returns to the land. The soul returns to the land. Images of the wilderness and wandering undead surfaced in Lumian's mind. He had to admit Leah's association made sense. Arriving at the elm tree at the village entrance, Ryan surveyed the area and remarked, let's not provoke that madam further. Regarding escaping the loop, even if she doesn't provide aid, she won't become an enemy. We just need to monitor her movements and see if we can utilize the specific temporal node she mentioned. Wasn't it because you clearly couldn't defeat her if you didn't provoke her? Lumian suppressed his mouth, ready to retort. He then asked Valentine, how many minutes? He worried that if he mistimed, his sister would trigger the loop and restart everything. Valentine extracted a gold pocket watch and popped it open. 10 minutes remaining. That's good. Lumion sighed in relief and waved at Ryan and the others. I'm going to search for Aurora. If you've nothing else to do, help me locate Sybil's husband, Jean Maury. Investigate who's spreading the rumor that the horoscopes are about to change, and everyone will usher in good fortune. If you discover anything, come to my house to find me. Goodbye, my cabbages. That was what Leah and the others had planned to do, so no one objected. Lumion fell into deep thought as he bade farewell to the joint investigation team and walked to the agreed-upon spot at the edge of the village. After completing his exploration of the cathedral's underground, he had a darn good hunch about the anomaly in Cordu. The ones responsible for the loop were definitely the Padres group. They'd been secretly worshipping an evil god for at least 6 months, and had secretly sacrificed quite a few foreigners under the cathedral in exchange for loads of boons. Before Lent, the Padre Pons Benet and their lot had received a boon using the 3 Beyonders that Shepherd Pierre Barry had brought back. Or at least one of them. The former instantly became a pretty powerful Beyonder. Hence, they kicked off a grand ritual at the start of Lent. On the 12th night, in the final stage of the ritual, the hidden being with the name of Inevitability would accept the large-scale sacrifice and complete something that the Padre and company had prayed for. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. The ritual failed to complete, and the power involving the past, present, and future dissipated, bringing about a time loop. As for what unexpected event had occurred, Lumion recalled something the mysterious lady had once said. You belong to the group of individuals who are on the brink of being corrupted. Luckily, the mark left by that great existence was activated, and the corresponding power descended upon you, sealing the source of corruption and establishing balance.